Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Say Report. I'm your host, Devon Decker, and joining me, as always, my host, companion, and number one in your hearts, it's Sejohn Sarowick. Hello, Sejohn.
Horts? I don't know what accent this is supposed to be. Number one in your horts.
Well, you're pretty lucky that I didn't come in hard with the Boston accent, because I've been spending my time watching a particular show that premiered on the 11th, and my God, my family has never been more Boston than it has been the last 2 days.
Oh, man. The bear is back, bud.
The bear is back. Oh, it's so good, dude. The series is so good. But before we get into all that, hi, welcome to the Say Report. It's a show about everything. Sorry. Sejohn, when do you think I woke up today? That's going to be the game we start with this week with.
Well, considering the 2 a.m. Mountain Time message I received, I got a pretty good idea about when you were up.
Oh, fuck. I forgot I communicated with you.
Yeah. Not just you. It seems like the whole Decker household was out and about at 4 o'clock in the morning. What's going on, guys?
No, so yeah, up before...
Well, you had to get up and collect the Smurf berries.
It's gummy berries, thank you. It takes an ounce a bounce, a pound a pounce of those ripe gummy berries in varying amounts. And if I said any more, I would be giving away the secrets of how to make gummy berry juice. And I can't do that. I will get kicked out of the gummy clan.
In which case, the gummy clan will have to kill you.
Yes, exactly. They're a lot like the mafia. Woke up this morning, got some gummy berry juice. So yeah,
Good morning, Dev.
I've been up since 4 a.m. and let's see. So I went to sleep. Okay. Oh, I had all these plans for this week, right? I was gonna play my game from Japan, but it got delayed because of all the weather issues, so it didn't come in until Friday. And something magical happened on Thursday that I wasn't expecting. Magical is giving it far too much like fantastic agency. But are you? I feel like we've talked about it on the show before, but if not, if we did, it was at least 2 years ago.
So that means we get a total pass on revisiting old bits. I just want everybody to be aware that I am on that page as well. Go
also,
ahead.
Welcome to the 7th season finale of the Say Report.
Yeah, man.
As we talk about
365, right?
Yeah.
Wasn't that what we were just saying?
This is our 365th episode. So there's now a Say Report for every day of the year. And then, leap year will be recorded next week, which is convenient because we're in a leap year. So, a couple of years ago, I played a game called Momodora. And I played Momodora because I found, the itch.io to the original game. And that's a very small, contained... It reminds me of Cave Story, the way that Cave Story started. Not what Cave Story eventually grew into.
When you say started, you mean the way the game starts or the way that the game existed and then became something else by the time it, hit Switch and stuff like that?
The way that it existed.
Okay,
it's clearly a little game that was built, very basic art in the first Momodora game. Your weapon is a knife in the first game, which is hilarious because it eventually gets turned into a maple leaf. And
now,
honestly,
I appreciate you equating it to something like Cave Story so that I'm on board, but I do have to say that probably isn't enough to bring everybody on board. What is the style of game? Is this
it's a Metroidvania.
2D
it's
Metroidvania?
a 2D
Gotcha,
platforming Metroidvania.
Okay, cool.
Which, for anyone that doesn't know what a Metroidvania is, because there's been a lot of contention about that term and how, you have to know what two things are to understand what even that term means.
But it essentially you collect tools that allow you to go back to places you've already been and go and traverse them in different ways.
Exactly.
That allow you to find more tools to do the same thing over and over. So the map, what's cool about them is the map slowly builds upon itself, and so it's a really fun and easy way. I say this with major quotes around it, but it's a really fun and easy way for developers to be able to kind of work in a more contained space and just do more within it and create really cool games. It's why it's so big in the indie scene. But sorry, go ahead.
No, I appreciate that because I'm lost to this because I beat the first game a long time ago, and then I found out there was a 2, and then 3 you had to buy on Steam, and then the 4th game, Momodora Reverie Under the Moonlight, was huge. It was released everywhere. is the only one that is on PlayStation, Xbox, and all of those, and Switch.
No, it's the Itch.io dream. I
Yeah.
mean, so Itch.io is this phenomenal like indie creative space for video games, and like I still hop on there all the time to play like all sorts of silly shit like Snake.io and stuff like that, right? But there's some really cool shit that people are using those tools to build some really dense games, and like this is the dream scenario: is that you really prove yourself in that space, and then you're able to bring that product further and further and further to eventually a console type release, or even for some people the dream is a PC release. But there's a there's an argument to be made that the limitations and restrictions of a console release really prove that you've made it. But like that I don't want to be kicking a bunch of really good PC developers in the nuts. Like
No. I mean, at the time, certainly the industry has changed to the point where a console release used to be like huge, because Nintendo, like, we need to authorize everything and you need to follow our standards and practices to be a game on a Nintendo system. And that.
Yeah.
So the PC, especially with something like Steam, where it was very easy for you to submit a game and then get it onto a PC, there was still some level of difficulty to get that game onto an actual console. And it was still sort of a time where consoles still made up the majority market share of the video game space. We're coming to an era of parity. It's not there yet, but PC gaming has become a lot more mainstream with the type of people, and in no short reason because of something like the Steam Deck, which then made Asus release a Windows handheld. So even if you don't really know what to do with a PC, they've kind of set it all together the way that like your PlayStation 5 is all together. So if you don't know anything about a computer, you're able to turn it on and play games.
Well, and we've been on the development side of things. Like this is, and that's the other thing, is that we're talking about everything that you just said is totally correct from a consumer point of view, right?
Yeah.
The thing is that from a development point of view, the story has always kind of been that like PC first is where you start. That's how you build video games, right? And there's this idea that like we've been for a while now. I think we've been in this era, but we are currently in this era of kind of like punk development, where you end up with like, it's not just indie. It's not just guys out there saying I'm doing this for myself and doing my own thing. There are people out there actively trying to develop in ways that go against the mainstream like concepts to prove that it can be done, right? And so you end up with a lot of these developers that are just out there literally just to prove a point, which is really interesting because like a lot of stuff becomes more pointed, when people decide to not go to console, it is a much more meaningful decision and things like that. So it's an interesting fucking world. Like indie development is such an umbrella term nowadays, which is a good thing. Like I think a lot of people feel like it's gotten a little overblown and people use it inappropriately and things like that. And it's fair. Like we should always be talking about like how words work and what they mean, because that changes on a freaking day-to-day basis nowadays, right? But like I'm not gonna put my foot down one way or another about what constitutes indie development, but there is a certain sect within the development community that really feels like married to this idea of like starting out in these small spaces, really working by yourself, proving yourself, and if you can't do it this way, if you have to depend on that capitalist system that exists on the console side of things, like that you're really kind of, I mean, even Steam to that point, like there's a lot of issues people have in that regard with Steam and things like that.
Yeah.
This is a really, I love these kinds of stories about these kinds of games that started out in these kinds of spaces and have survived because they are really rare. But yeah, this game is not this series that you're talking, Momodora, right? Is like one of those ones that you just hear about like everywhere when people talk about development success. But also to that point, I have never played it. I have never even seen it, and then I don't know how many people who praise it really have had their hands on it, because the story is always much more about the success of developing and getting this far than it ever is about like what the game actually is, for good or for ill.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing. I mean, right now, anyone could go out and download Momodora 1 and Momodora 2. So it's just Momodora and Momodora 2. Those are available for free still. Like he said, through itch.io, or I think just like on like CNET, they might just be available. Those are available. They're great little self-contained experiences. So I played through the first one, really enjoyed it. Went to play the second one, but I'm like, no. If I'm going to do this, and I'm going to eventually play up to Reverie Under the Moonlight, I want to make sure that I can find all of the games. I don't want to skip any of the games in the series, which is going to be interesting later on in this story. So remember that I said that. So I found the first two, and then the third one was only available through Steam. And this was at a time where I didn't really have a PC that I was comfortable playing Steam games on. And I know that might sound like the most insane connection of words ever, but it was one of those situations where, like,
no, man, as a guy that has only recently upgraded to a computer that could handle that kind of shit, like, I kind of get where you're coming from. But is that what you were talking about, like a performance angle? Or was it that you didn't technically own it because it was, like, owned by your company or something? Because that's also a situation a lot of people find themselves in, is that their primary device is also one that is not one that they outright own nowadays, which is a scary thing that I kind of am running into right now on the job market, is how many people are just like, you know, you'll be issued this computer and that's the computer you have to use. And when I, as a designer, talk about like having my setup in the way that things are, can I do that kind of stuff on your machine? It's like, well, no, you'll have to do A, B, and C instead. And it's just like, but fucking, I am so much more comfortable in D, E, and F. What are you doing?
yeah.
So like, it's a double, like there's two issues at play here when you talk about that. And I think it's a fair point to bring up that if you were in a position where you weren't comfortable with Steam running on your device, I don't think you're the only one. There's a lot of people right now that want to be playing these kinds of games that find themselves in this weird kind of back and forth of like, do I bother upgrading my computer if so many parts of it are this many years old, or I don't even own the damn thing, like that kind of stuff.
So it wasn't that I didn't own one. It's that I had a laptop specifically for like gaming, but then I gamed on it a little bit and it ended up being a bit of a disappointment. It like overheated a couple of times and I'm like, all right, so you were good for gaming when I got you, which even then, like, it was a clearance deal on Newegg. So it was one of those, like, it was a really good price and it was like a solid baseline. But then the way that games just grow and change, you get to a point where, like, I mean, obsolescence is built into technology, unfortunately. Planned obsolescence is a term for a reason, just as the crow flies.
Yeah, but this is also one of the oldest cons of PC gaming, right? Is that idea that like the pro is that for less money you can get a device today that will play today's games pretty damn well for less money than buying a console. The con side of that though is that more than a console, you are more likely to hit like a level cap or like a plateau of what some part of your machine can do. So you're going to have to keep investing to keep your PC going. Whereas like a PlayStation, and if 5 years later you might have to buy the PlayStation 5 in order to keep up, which sucks. But if you consider what a PC would have had to do in that 5 years in order to keep up as well, you actually kind of end up saving money in the long run, right? So that's part of that. That's always been part of the financial math on this stuff.
I like to joke that do you want to spend $500 every 5 years or $500 every year? That's sort of the difference between a PC and a console.
See, now that's a joke, Devon.
Oh, thank you. That's off mic conversation from before. Thanks for referencing it. But yeah, no. So that was like the situation. But like that little computer could play the first Momodora, but then after playing the first and loving it as much as I did, seeing that the third one I was gonna have to look into having a better computer in order to run it. I'm like, I'm not going to play it. And then years later, it was during the pandemic, so probably 2020. Again, we may have already discussed this. If you type in Momodora into the tag search, it'll come up. And I'm sure we did, because it was a lost weekend for me. Because I finally had my Optiplex that started out as just a refurbished Dell Optiplex because it was a solid machine to stream when I was playing on actual SNES hardware to do the Link to the Past randomizer stuff that I was doing. So it didn't need to do much more other than receive a signal and broadcast that signal to the internet. But then over time, and especially in the pandemic, I updated the RAM. I got an actual video card for it so that it could actually function as my PC and do some gaming. The bitch of it is that it is still Windows 7. So Return to Monkey Island was the reminder that, like, yeah, if you're on Windows 7, a lot of these games are just going to be like, fuck you eventually.
Oh, actually, we're now past 8.5, I believe, or 8.7, I think is what was the last Windows 8 version that there was, right?
Yeah.
But they've officially announced Microsoft has officially announced that like you got to get off of 8.7, otherwise your shit ain't going to work in the next year. So
I'm fairly certain Windows 10 has a
was
freaking
10
death
included in that
date.
as well?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see. When I'm
I
gonna
wouldn't be surprised. I don't recall Windows 10 being named in that because of how much trouble they've been having getting people onto 11. Not that they've been having nearly as much trouble as they did getting people onto 10. I think that's really funny. The stories out there about people talking about how like they're still having trouble getting companies to get off of 10 because of the hassle of getting onto 10. They're just like, you know how long it fucking took us to sort this out last time? We do not want to be doing this again. And it's a very, very interesting little like subplot to a lot of what's going on in the tech industry right now, along with everything else falling apart. The idea that nobody wants to get off of Windows 10 is kind of in the background.
Yeah. EOS for Windows 10 is October 14th, 2025. So, like, you have essentially 2 years left with it, but the fact that they've even announced an end of service date is something to just be wary of.
Yeah, no, 100%. That's awesome. I had not even heard that.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that you brought that up because I got to look into some shit.
Yeah, right? It's the end of Season 7, and we're also going to tell you when your technology is going to stop working.
Well, just like a side note to go back to the looking for jobs thing, right? One of those things was that I came up against a company where they said this is the kind of equipment that we would be supplying for you. And this was just in the write-up. Like they were like, don't even bother, it's okay if you don't even own a computer because we'll supply you with A, B, and C. And I was reading through what they would expect me to use, and I was just like, a lot of this stuff doesn't exist anymore. Like certain programs that have been like bought up by other programs and like Windows talking about, a Windows machine with Windows 10 on it. And I just came from a company that had a lot of problems with trying to get people onto 11 and blah, blah, blah. So I reached out and I was like, if I prefer working on 11 at this point, because I do, without getting into too much of the nitty gritty, I was like, is it okay if I'm working in an 11 environment, or is that something that you guys would frown on? And obviously, I'm not talking to anybody at the company yet. This is just like somebody that's doing the write-ups and the recruiters. So their hard line was like, what's in the equipment is what they're going to be expecting you to be comfortable with. So I was like, okay, I really wish I could talk to someone at the company because I have a funny feeling that there isn't a designer sitting there that's just like, yeah, no, we need to stick to this.
I mean, at the same time, we do come from the world of theater, Sejohn. That is the wonderful world that we cut our teeth on. And I don't know about you, what you got at East Providence High School, but I was working on technology from the 60s.
Sure, we're not, but this isn't theater.
So,
this is
the tech
Silicon
industry
Slopes.
that you're literally working in. So you would imagine that they wanted to go, they want you to know as up to date as possible, but I also wouldn't be surprised if they're like, yeah, no, we got this one accounting program that needs to run on 10, so the whole system's stuck on 10.
Yeah.
Like,
the only way it connects to anything is if it still runs off of a Windows 8 computer that's in a back room somewhere that we just have to keep it offline, because if we ever put it online, Microsoft will fuck our entire financials.
Yeah, we have an air-gapped computer, but it's only so we can still run Windows 8. Wow, that sounds terrible. Oh, it is. The
industry is a goddamn mess right now.
Yeah. So like I finally had it working, and I'm like, I'm gonna do Momodora, right? Like there was one of those things where you just had the time to finally do all those things. So in one day, I played through Momodora 1 through 4, like full completion, all 4 of the games, and it was wonderful. And partially what inspired me to do this is that they released another game that is considered the spiritual successor called Minoria. And I've never played Minoria. That I will say that the animation of it was such a departure. Like the first 3 Momodora games are like that cave story, like almost 4-bit style, where like it's small, your character's kind of small, the world is large because they're small, that sort of setup. But then Reverie Under the Moonlight, they switched to these big, beautiful pixel, like full art. And I mean, Reverie Under the Moonlight, as much as I will say play through all 3 of the original Momodora games so that you understand all of the deep lore that actually builds out Reverie Under the Moonlight, it's not super necessary. That being said, the game I'm about to talk about, Momodora Moonlit Farewell, is kind of a direct sequel to 3, which is interesting because right now Momodora Moonlit Farewell is only available on Steam. But I didn't know about Momodora Moonlit Farewell until Tuesday when I finally got my dental consultation. And that's right, folks, I do need surgery. And if you want me to explain all the gory details, we'll save that for next week. But what they're going to do to my tooth, like he's talking like it's a normal Tuesday for him because as a dentist, it is. But as like somebody who's never had this type of procedure done,
those are my bones.
That sounds terrifying. Thank you.
Yeah, please. Those are my out bones. Please don't touch my out bones.
I will start with, we're going to cut a little hatch into the tooth. Oh, okay.
And then we're going to shrink down to very small size and go through the hatch.
That's like, what the fuck? Why would you refer to it as a hatch?
There will be a series of numbers, and John Locke will know what to do.
Only because Desmond will escape as soon as you blow the hatch. She really wants to know what's inside that hatch. My tooth. Hey, brother. Anywho, lots of memories from Lost just flying all around the room right now. But yeah, so I'm numbed out from the consultation to see if my tooth is even viable for surgery. And good news, it is. But then I'm like, I don't want to go to work. I'm just going to head home. And I'm just clicking through YouTube and I see 25 Metroidvanias coming in 2024 you might not be aware of. And the third one on that list was Momodora Moonlit Farewell. And I'm like, frick, another Momodora? That's awesome. I was a little nervous that with the departure from the Momodora series into Minoria, we weren't going to get another game in the series. No, we've grown off. We've spun off into Frasier. You're never going to see the bar in Boston again get past it. So I was like, over the moon, pardon the pun if you're familiar with the storyline of the game, that a new Momodora was coming. And in the video, they're like, we know it's coming sometime this year, so just keep an eye out. Turns out that the sometime this year was literally 2 days away on January 11th. And I'm like,
maybe you really didn't know this game was coming, huh?
It felt like the stealthest release ever. I logged into Twitch just to have background noise, and I saw somebody was playing it, and my initial thought was, oh, lucky son of a bitch, he's all in the industry, he got early access to it, and I'm like, meh about it. But I'm like, or maybe it's out, we could check, and I go into Steam, lo and behold, it released that day. So I shut down Twitch because I didn't want no spoilers, went home, immediately downloaded it, and I didn't really get to play it until yesterday. So I went to sleep at midnight because I had gotten to the point of a Metroidvania. Now, here's the thing about Metroidvanias, and I know for a fact I've said this before. Back in the Ritual, the Bloodstained account of early access, when I had that game a week before it released.
Ritual of early access, but yes.
No, it's Ritual of the Night is the game. I think I called it Account of Access or something like that. AOA, yeah, AOA. So the hard thing about a Metroidvania is if you play it too late, when you get to a point where like you're frustrated enough to like rip your fingers out of your sockets, like you can just go and find the answer. And that's why whenever a game I actually care about, like Momodora, it's like, I have to shut down. This has to be my life for right now. Because I don't want to just go online and get an answer to these questions, right? I want to, or something, or even something like Axiom Verge, where like, if you got to play that when it was new, you got to be part of the throngs of people online trying to figure out all the meta puzzles and shit that was going on.
It's the Fez
effect, yeah.
The Fez effect, right? Like, right, yeah. Where the sad. There's something to be said about this with even like the Dark Souls series and stuff too, right? Like in the early days of that game, like people just trying to figure out like what the hell am I doing wrong? I can't get past this thing, and then realizing that like the meta of that game was like, well, there's ways to cheese it, or you just got to get good, right? But that kind of thing. I miss those days, man. But I get it. Wanting to like kind of divorce yourself from that. And there's something to be said about like the endorphin rush of figuring that shit out on your own, right? Like that's part of the game loop in most games.
Yeah, I mean that's what the initial fun of that is like you're dropped into this world and you have to explore and you have to remember all of these things that will be meaningful later on down the line, and it's just like
I think we just talked about this a couple of months ago at this point, I guess, with Super Mario RPG and my first playthrough of it, like of the re-release. it was the first time in a long time that I've played that game where I didn't let myself look up a guide of any kind. I wanted to just play that game as based off of both my memory and, parts where that game was maybe not being, or maybe when my memory wasn't so good, is the game good enough to still point me in the right direction? And 99.9% of that panned out just fine. Still, still have some thoughts about the after game stuff, but considering that wasn't part of the original story and didn't really affect my playing of that game, I'm a lot more forgiving of those moments as they are after credits. But anyway,
Yeah,
continue.
have you figured out any stuff in the post game in that one?
Yeah,
Or-
so no,
okay.
so the game loop now, and I'm just gonna tell it like this isn't a spoiler, and I wish somebody had told me, so you're welcome, everybody. But the game loop post credits on that is just keep going back to the Frog Sage, and he'll basically give you bounties, and then you go out and you do a thing, and you get a really good prize for getting whatever it is that he mentions. Like just do that, just keep going back to the Frog Stage and just see where he's pointing you and do what he tells you to do. Like that is the post game stuff, and it's fun, it's great now that I know that, but like the game the game does not make that clear like in every way. Like that the game makes it clear enough, I guess, because like I understand when I talk about this that I'm not in the majority here, like that most people were able to figure out this post game stuff. Well, most people didn't play the post game stuff is what I'm actually figuring out, but like
Oh.
anybody that did, most of them were able to figure that out just fine. But I found myself in a somewhat unique situation in that because I hadn't finished main game stuff, the Frog Sage was still telling me about that stuff. So if I had done that stuff, it maybe would have been more clear when I went to him after credits. But I cannot be the only person that does not 100% the game before going back to that stuff, right? Like there is something weird about the ways in which that game kind of broke on me because the dialogue tree didn't quite work in the way that it was supposed to point me in the right direction. But that again is all so deep buried in post game that I don't really hold it much against the rest of the game.
Yeah. I mean, the best example I can give is that the person who has the fastest clear time right now on, what's this, the 14th, January 14th, 2024, is Void with a 2 hour, 32 minutes, and 22 seconds. And he is very adamant that he has not done the post game and he never really intends to.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
like,
I mean, it's cool that it's there for people that want it, and I did enjoy. Like, first of all, I have not been able to finish it. There are a couple of fights in that post game ones that were tough, and the one that I'm currently on is a fucking bitch.
I kind of feel like you might be in Moleville, my friend.
Yes, I am. Yeah. So it's so like it's fun, but it is difficult to the point where it's not always fun, and it's part of the reason why I haven't finished it. And I think we talked about this a little bit with Wonder, where I hit that point. The thing is, in Wonder, it's so disappointing because of A, how in my face it is that I haven't finished that shit, and B, that it is legitimately just this one fucking level. It's not a clump of stuff that I'm just never going to be able to touch. In some ways, that would hurt less. The fact that in Wonder, there is legitimately just one thing standing in my way from like completing everything in that game it really sours my feelings towards that game a little bit.
Yeah, I get that. For me, what pissed me off about Wonder is the standees of it all. I don't know if I've really fully expressed my thing that like there is a medal associated with getting all of the standees.
Yeah, but they're cute. Like they're a
they're
fun,
cute and
easy
they're
to
a fun
collect
little
thing.
thing. My issue is I probably did mention this. I wasn't spending purple coins, so for a lot of the game I was just at 999 flower coins. So that at the end of the game, like when I had to grind them up,
Yeah,
like
you need
it
like
was a
3,000,
huge
right?
fucking grind to do that. So
Yeah.
So I kind of effed myself over because I didn't even consider that standees might be something they would count towards a true 100% of that game.
Oh yeah, it is fucking weird. I will definitely agree with you on that. As much as I don't think it's difficult, so it doesn't really offend me. It is weird that they put the collect every standee achievement on the same level as like, for instance, completing every level. Like the fact that I have not gotten that final star because I can't do one level, compared to the fact that the standees were a fucking breeze because I was buying standees every second I could because they were all so damn cute. Like they got me. Like they got me with that gimmick. Like it is totally a fucking gimmick, but like I was on it hook, line, and sinker.
It's a gimmick and it's a fun gimmick and it's a better executed gimmick than the gacha machines in Kirby and the Forbidden Lands. Like,
Man,
I'm
it's
sitting
just-
at
it is stupid that it's on
98% there, and I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm not. I've gone through the battle arena enough times to like max coins and then bought gacha things. The fact that there's no way to be like, if you pay 2,000 coins, we guarantee you'll get one you don't already have,
Right.
is awful. I'm never gonna get to 100% this game that I poured a lot of time into, and it doesn't matter, right? I'm not Gerard, and thank God I'm not Gerard, because charity fraud allegedly. But so like, it's fun to complete a game, but another part of like completing games is knowing what your level of I have completed this game is.
Yeah.
And
I mean, this is a tale as old as achievements, though, right?
Yeah.
Like, this is stuff that even back on the old Xbox, people used to talk about games putting in these types of achievements that were just stupid. And anybody that wanted to be a completionist, a time when that term really came to fruition in the gaming world, right? Like, anybody that wanted to be a true completionist had a lot of real opinions about some of the stuff that you'd find on Xbox and PlayStation in those early trophy days of just like, this is fucking stupid. I've done 99.9% of this game, more than 80% of your fucking like player base, and I can't get that last little 0.% because I didn't spend 3,000 coins a day for 5 days in a row at your store or some shit like that, right? Like it's such a wild achievement to throw in there. And back to the wonder stuff, like I just cannot reiterate like how much it is weird to me that they put that on the same level as some of the hardcore completion stuff that you have to do to get the rest of the stars. The idea that a full star is associated with just buying those little standees is kind of ridiculous.
yeah, I as the person who it was the last medal I got in both of my playthroughs of Wonder, yeah. That offended me a little bit, just a little bit. I don't hold it against Nintendo because the rest of the game was pretty good, but if we're not talking about Super Mario Wonder in even 6 months since it's released, I won't be surprised. Yeah. But yeah, so back to Momodora. So I'm playing it last night, and I get to this point where I just legitimately have no idea where to go. It is the point of the game where I need to go square by square and find what I am missing. So I'm like, you know what? I'm going to go to sleep. I can't just drive myself insane. I got the show tomorrow. I want to finish the game. I will try to finish the game in the morning, but I just need to go to bed. So then I wake up at 4 and I'm like wide awake. It's not even like, oh man, I could definitely get back to sleep. And I woke up for no reason. I just woke up. So I go on the internet, and this is a little bit related, and I got a little bit mad at some fandoms that I like, Ninja Turtle people. And just, you hate to see some of just the ignorance and hate that exists in the fans of something that you love, right? We've touched on that a lot with Ghostbusters.
There's something really unique about the 90s animation fans, though, that just have a certain kind of breed of grossness to some of the shit that they pull out sometimes. Like the Ninja Turtles guys, anybody that has anything to do with Ghostbusters nowadays, right? Like G.I. Joe and He-Man and that whole like side of things. Like, people have some weird opinions from that particular era that I really am having trouble stomaching lately.
Yeah, I don't want to go deeper into this one. It would require a lot of reading and stuff. And we're already kind of being esoteric with like talking adjacently to a game. So I get upset, and then Dale's up. And now Dale's up because she was having stomach issues. She was like, oh, I'm feeling queasy and that. So she's up at 4. So we're talking to each other. I'm trying to distract her, so I'm like, I can't believe these people. They say they're fans of it, and then they'll say these things like, you miss the messaging of like, you should try to love everybody or give everybody a chance. That was like the mess. So that whole thing. So then it comes to 5 o'clock, and she's like, well, I'm gonna try to go to sleep. My stomach's feeling better. Thank you. And I'm like, well, I'm awake. I'm gonna go try to finish Momodora. So I start the painstaking Metroidvania process of, I'm going to go square by square. But the other problem, and this is the new problem that I'm experiencing with this style of game, this like adventure platformer style game, is just because it's released doesn't mean that it's finished.
Ugh.
And that's a real issue. Like, so Account of Access from Ritual of the Night, the Bloodstained game I played, I bought that game. It was printed on a disc, and I was able to play through it. But a couple of the bosses were not coded. Like, you just get to a boss room and nothing would happen. And the game itself did not become fully completable. No, I was able to beat it. I was able to do it. But, like, I couldn't fully 100% it until the release day because of, like, those extra bestiary entries that I wouldn't be able to gain until that day one patch.
Yeah, the infamous day one patch, right?
The infamous day one patch. And that, that gets to me, and I'm just like, but, I'm also the guy who got the game early, like, due to shipping errors, and I have to understand that day one patch is going to be part of it. Back in 2021, when I flew down to North Carolina to drive my friend back to Rhode Island so they wouldn't have to drive 12 hours alone, I found out about the game Tears of Astalon. And I bought the game, played the game, loved the game, went to play it again, and they're like, there's an update. And I read the changes, and they literally changed the layout of the castle. And it's like, well, that's really friggin' weird. If it were early access, I'd get a change like that. But just people are playing the game, and you feel like it's too easy for them, so you've made the castle harder. That seems a little extreme.
Well, especially because it's not unusual for things like a new game plus to be added later. So why not add that as just a new game plus, like, hey, the first one was kind of easy. Let's see if you could take this one on, right? Like, rather than fuck everybody over, why not put that out there as an option? I feel like we've had that discussion.
We've talked about that one, right?
Is like they do this shit and they force everybody into this because essentially the argument is that people aren't playing the game the way we intended, and it's just really, it's wild. It's a wild conversation because, like, okay, but we are playing it and enjoying it, and isn't that more important than us getting, like, whatever specific nugget of whatever you were trying to this is when we start to get into those heady, like, conversations about, like, the meaning of art and shit like that in video games. And
yeah. So, like, that's the other one. Is that, like, okay, so because I played Astalon the day it released, I played a completely different game than what somebody who's buying it even 2 weeks after release is going to play. And that's weird, right? Like, just experience-wise. And then, my favorite game to beat up on, it's a beat-em-up, so that's ironic, River City Girls 2, on release date, was missing a cutscene and was missing a boss mechanic. Like, one of the bosses was supposed to send you into a virtual world, and on day one, that didn't happen. And you beat a boss, and then it's just like, oh, we're all together. And then, within a week, they're like, oh, we finally added this cutscene here to explain what happens. And the Suika boss fight actually has this mechanic working now. It's like, hey, should you have printed the game on discs before it was complete? Like, a game shouldn't be able to go gold. It should not be authorized to print until it is a complete package.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a place where, the whole system is fucked, and this is not unusual. Everything that you've talked about is happening everywhere in video games. So, like, this is not like a one-off situation. But I just don't understand, like, the systems that are in place that are supposedly supposed to be very gatekeepery. We hinted at this earlier when we were talking about the whole indie development stuff. Like, the idea that something gets the thumbs up from Xbox, from PlayStation, from Nintendo, that is supposed to say, like, yeah, okay, we approve for you to kind of put this out on our system. And, like, you do need to go through those companies in order to get that kind of approval. It's a huge deal for people that are like, yeah, it's not on PlayStation because I just don't feel like dealing with PlayStation's approval process, is not an unheard of, like, conversation, right? What is the rigorous, like, testing that these guys are doing at these places that they're allowing these things to go to print when, like, you get to a point where the game just doesn't work anymore? Like, it just doesn't move forward at this point because this boss never showed up, is, like, a pretty fucking wild thing to allow to go to print.
Yeah, it's just crazy that's a sort of thing. So, in the time since Momodora Moonlit Farewell has released on Thursday, it has gone through, I'm trying to do the math in my head real quick. Yeah, 10 minor updates, 1.0F A through H, which that's not 10. J would be 10. So 8. But then like it also was a one from 1.0 to 1.0F for official, and then 1.0FA. It's just like, okay, so you're changing it. But every time I took a break from playing yesterday, when I came back, there was a new update.
I was going to say, that's multiple updates in
a day. There were 4 updates to the game yesterday. 5 if you consider from when I went to bed at midnight, and then they released another one at 12:31. I played there's 5 separate builds of the game in that
there's
time.
Some poor team out there that is like working like on the fucking fly as problems arise, and that sucks. That is not the way that they should have to work.
Well, I say that, you say that, but this is a game that was built, 4 people are completely programmed this game. And then they went to a publisher to do like the localization and those things. So those four individuals, like, they kind of knew what they were getting into. But I wonder if it was the publisher saying we want to hit it this date so that it's not swallowed up by other games that are coming. Like, you have to wonder that developer publisher sort of synergy there, because the fact that every time I went away, I came back to an update. I'm like, oh my God, like, was it broken before? Like, what if I did something and now because of how me doing that, I've messed up my progress and I need to start from the beginning? It's a bit of a nerve-wracking experience. And it is like, so you're at that point, and I would never think, I am reminded of Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess, where everybody was like, the game's broken, Nintendo fucked up, because you had to catch 2 fish instead of just 1 fish. You had to prove that you could fish twice.
Right.
Not just once. Like, and that was, I don't know if it was meant to be that way or that, but everybody was like, because of that, like, the internet was full of the Twilight Princess is broken. Twilight Princess is broken. Nintendo messed up with the Wii. It's like everybody wanted them to fail, and then because they made that one small, like, error in communicating to the player or whatever it may have been, they were out for blood.
Yeah, which is nuts, because I think we've talked about this before, but I never knew that this was an issue, because I have to imagine I just liked the fishing mechanics so much. I was just already fishing multiple times. Mm-hmm. So I must not have I never ran into this issue. I didn't realize it was broken on the Wii until I think you and I had this conversation on the
show,
air.
right? Yeah, so it's one of those situations. And so I don't want to be one of those people who like immediately jumps to game's broken. I don't want to be that person, because I lived through everything that happened with Twilight Princess and the Wii. But then when the game is getting 4, 5 updates in a day, and I'm at the point where I'm like, I don't know where to go anymore, and I've already kind of retraced my steps, and I found a little like side quest mission that I didn't realize was going to even happen because of like traversing all over the map. I'm like, I don't want to think that the game is broken. It has to just be me forgetting the one room where I can use one of the tools that I've gotten. And sure enough, at 5 o'clock when I sat down, going room to room, I found the room where I'm like, all right, I needed a wall jump for this room. So I made the progress, and then from there it was smooth sailing to the end of the game. And that was fine, and it was fun. And I'm like, I'm really happy I didn't freak out and go online being like, where can I find this item? Like, it is a cool story. It's an enjoyable story. It's enjoyment with the game. Even though I was frustrated. But then I do want to point out that, like, now with Metroidvanias, you have that small window where where you can play it and it will be new, right? You won't have had, like, the big reveals or, like, the big puzzles ruined for you. Or you won't have the opportunity when you get to one of those moments where, like, I'm completely stumped, you just type in, like, moon dust, and it will say, the moon dust is located here. It requires these items in order to get. So, like, but there's also this other end of it now, where you also want to make sure that the game is actually complete and running.
Right.
Like, so, this is the first one that I've really experienced where, like, it was such a big thought in my mind, like that, like, maybe the game's not done, and I'm just like, unfortunately caught in an early build that has some game-breaking bug. And I'm happy I didn't like stop there and restart to try to figure it out, but it just kind of sucks that that's something that even went through my mind. And also, on the subject of wonder, like you just need one thing in order to complete it, Momodora 5, that's Midnight Farewell, is the 5th game of the series. It was excellent. I had a great time with it. There are no problems with it if you wanted to go out and buy it right now as of the release of this episode. And I would recommend it if you're looking for a good Metroidvania. All the lore that you would need from the first 4 games is given to you by a documentarian.
Mm-hmm.
You check in with him and he's like, oh, you asked me to hold on to your notes about your earlier adventures. And literally summaries of the first 4 games are there, which is pretty cool. So I enjoyed that. But I finished the game with 110%. And the trophy, achievement, whatever, is finished, complete 111% of the game. So that sucks. That sucks being like there's 1% out there and I don't know what that 1% is.
Yeah,
right?
That's a bummer.
Especially
even if at least you had like an idea of like, oh yeah, well I know I didn't like collect all these things, maybe it's that. At least that would give you somewhere to go.
Yeah. Well, it's especially bad when you got the message that came up that said you collected all the health upgrades, you collected all the magic upgrades, you collected all the stamina upgrades, you collected and found all of the hidden fairies, you found all of the crystal repositories. So like I got those notifications that like 100% completion on that. So it's not as if, okay, I missed one of these and I got the notice for everything, so it must be I got to find out how to get my magic up one more level. Right? And then I'm exploring and I would like your opinion on this. Is it bad game design to have a place where you can find and it just be an invisible wall and a sign that you can read that says, please return later? Because that felt a little bit like bad game design to me.
Well, yeah. Hey, look at that. Steam popped open for me and the first thing it wants me to do is buy Momodora Moonlight Farewell.
Yeah.
It's listening to us, Dev. I was opening this up literally to pull the game up a little bit to see if they've had anything to say about this. I mean, so there's a couple of things about that. First of all, in this particular instance, it does sound like bad game design. I totally agree with you because it doesn't seem to fit kind of the like it's one thing to have an area that you can't get to right now. I'm hitting this a lot with like Shantae, right? Where I'm running up against stuff where I'm like, oh, I'm not supposed to go this way yet, and like there's always like a guard standing in the way that in universe will give you some flavor text about how you just can't get past him right now, right? Or in SteamWorld Dig, which I've been doing right now, which is another awesome Metroidvania. Actually, SteamWorld Dig 2, to be clear, is what I'm playing. And it's an awesome little Metroidvania in and of itself. Has these areas you can't get to because you need to get the tools, and there's often signage or something in universe to indicate that, right? So it's like, it's not bad game design to have an area that makes people go, oh, I want to get here, but I can't right now. That's great. That's a great carrot.
Then you want to go back to it, yeah.
But if it doesn't make sense in universe for there to just be a posted sign that just says "come back later," I don't understand. Like, it's a real wild. That seems like a really cheap way out in this particular case because it does not seem to fit the attitude or the style of this game at all. But I also am not playing it, so maybe I'm missing something. If the art, if the context, if the story, if the humor of the game, it really supports that kind of silliness. Like, that's something I would expect in like a Borderlands game, right? Because it's a comedic series that openly acknowledges its video gameness all the fucking time. So if you came up against an invisible wall and there was just a stupid signpost there with like a bandit's head on it that just said something like "come back later, this part's not done loading yet," right? That would be funny to me, and I would come back later when it was done, right? But in this instance, no, I don't think that works. From what I understand about this game, that doesn't seem to work.
So here's the thing that happened in this game. This happened to me. Well, it happened to me 4 times because there were 4 places that I would fight through like pretty difficult platforming and an actual combat. And then I'd get to the end. I'm like, oh, what's my reward going to be? And I could see what my reward was. But between me and that reward was like shadowy mist. And as I approached it, it said moon mist blocks the way. And that pissed me off because I'm like, motherfucker, I didn't know that there was going to be moon mist blocking the way. So why, like, I wouldn't have done this if I knew that moon mist could block the way. But after finding 4 locations, I'm like, okay, so at some point, I will get the ability to unlock the moon mist. And then I finally find the guy who tells me how to do it, and that's where I'm like, I need to go to sleep. Because I've searched everywhere, and he's like, you need to find these 2 items and defeat my brother who has been corrupted. So, like, I defeated the brother, I got one of the items, and I could not find the other item. So I'm like, the only thing standing between me and all of these rewards that, like, I know where they are is finding this other item, and I got no fucking clue where that is. So that was fun. Like that, it pushed me forward, like you said. But in the main town, through an invisible wall, and then through an invisible wall in that area, there's like a glowing pit that you could fall into, and it registers on your map. So when you walk over there, though, there's just a sign that says, please return later. And then, spoilers for Momodora Moonlit Farewell. I'm going to spoil this part. After you beat the game, you can go there, and it is the dev room. And it's all the developers. They get to send their little message to you. Thank you for playing the game. We hope you enjoyed this part of it. I hope that as the new artist, my art style, like, stayed in line with other games in the series. Like, it was a nice little moment. But then, like,
if it's buried that far behind 2 invisible walls that people won't normally go through, I don't know. That seems a little bit more forgiving than what we were initially talking about.
That's fine.
Like,
no, that's what we're. But then, like, I'm thinking there's going to be a challenge of some kind. There is a challenge, right? And then we'll get to the fact that there's a challenge. But if I could go into that hole, right? And, you know, there are walls that are blocking me from progressing once I fall down the hole, and it's like out to lunch, then I know, I got to come back here later, right? Like it's a better way to communicate to me than like in the same way that like the moon mist communicated to me that like, yeah, you're probably not supposed to be here yet. Congratulations getting here, but you can't get this yet.
I just remembered what I was thinking of earlier. Yeah. That exact case that I was talking about of the don't come back or the game's not done loading yet. That's South Park. The South Park games work that way. You can, you know, like consoles will let you do the preload thing, and you can start playing even though like 30% of it's like loaded in, and they're still downloading in the background. I can't remember which one of the South Park games it is, but one of them, if you try and you can leave your house and you can walk up and down your street, but if you try to go anywhere else in the neighborhood, there's a bunch of 6th graders around that are all blocking all of the pathways, and they all say things like, "Don't come back," you know, "You can't come this way. The game's not done loading yet." Like, and like that's funny in universe, right? Because it's South Park. Like, so the 6th graders, who are these really this really great class within the games already that you come up against a lot, they're using in-universe baddies to stand in your way, and they're giving you the very like on point humorous answer of like, "You can't come this way, the game's not loaded." Like, that works. That it, as much as it is completely removing the mask of what's going on, because of the context of where that's happening, that totally works for me. Right?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, if there were just something like that, if I knew that it was going to be like just the credits room, it kind of bummed me out. But then like I go in there because I finally can enter it, and the thing that comes up is like, "Oh, you've completed the entire map. You've been everywhere in the map." So I'm thinking, well, that's got to be 1% I was missing, right? From my 110%. No, I'm still at 110% completing the map. So what am I supposed to do, Sejohn? Where is this other 1%? Do you know what the other 1% is?
Oh, you figured it out.
Oh, I got it. I got 111%. More spoilers. After you beat the game, you unlock a boss like replay mode, and you can play them regular or you can play them hard mode or nightmare, because it's all like in an ethereal dream realm where you're either reminiscing or having nightmares about these bosses. The only difference between the reminiscence and the nightmare are insta-kill squares being added to the arena. Which, honestly, I want to sing the praises of that being a way to make a boss fight harder. Because having to, like, navigate and make sure you don't hit a square that will instantly kill you really affects how you're going to fight a boss. It is like the most satisfying feeling in the world when I could beat these bosses, being like, oh, if I step there, I will die.
Yeah, well, it's the hot lava concept
Yeah.
where you can where one of the quickest ways to make a boss harder is you remove the floor and replace it with hot lava.
Right. So imagine the hot lava concept, but it could be like, so it's an aerial boss. Like the second boss you fight is a harpy, and they add the blocks to the sky so that like you're forced to fight her when she lands, as opposed to getting the hits in. And getting the hits in are a way to force her to land. So it makes you be like patient and understand when you can hit. And also, there's still room to jump around up there. You just need to make sure that you're navigating it properly. It was pretty friggin' cool. I liked that.
Man, Pandemonium. What's the name of the? There's a bullet
Panoply?
hell one hit. Huh?
Is it Panoply? Or something like that, right?
But there's like a one hit kill, and it's really fun because there's a multiplayer aspect. But it's like a platformer. But the idea is, what is the name of this game? It's gonna kill me. It's all that for the entire game, and it's very very neat boy in the ways in which the second you die, you instantly come back to life. So like you feel no loss in momentum, which is awesome because then you can keep going. I believe it's called Pandemonium. I'm gonna figure this game out.
I think it's Panopticon. That's a band. I don't know. I know you've recommended to me. I've played the demo of it, and I had a really good time with it. So like that was cool. But it's when you complete a certain amount of boss refights, you get an item, and then when you complete another certain amount of boss refights, you get the second item, and it is those two items that lock that last percent, and that kind of upset me.
Yeah.
Because maybe I should have finished the game at 100% instead of 110%. And then, re-beating bosses and getting the first item gives me, 5%. And then beating the second one gives me 5%. And then finally completing the map gives me that one additional percent.
Right, right.
Instead of why would I think that I should keep fighting in this boss fight when it is not adding anything to this game that has such a heavy focus on exploration. But I mean, I'm very happy that I played it. I'm glad I beat it 111%. There's an arranged mode, which is like mirror mode, and there are new fights to happen in there, and a hardcore mode where when you die, your save is deleted. So
that's wild.
I don't know if I'm going to jump into those because I do really want to play my Japanese game, Mamare no Bankuru, which I now know the actual name of, because in the time I waited for my game to arrive from Japan, they have already completely translated it to English. A full translation exists. And they have the name of it. There's a photo of it. I can't find it. But yeah, they've completely translated it to English. You need to do it on like a modded Switch in order to actually put the translation in. But there's a chance, Sejohn, if the game in Japanese is excellent, that I can possibly find a way for you to play it in English.
I mean, fantastic. I'm not opposed to playing games in Japanese. I would need a lot more guidance, I mean, the last time I played a game entirely in Japanese was it's some JRPG that I was trying to get a hold of, and for the Game Boy Advance, and so I had it, but I needed to have a guide up the entire time as like telling me what was going on, so that I could figure out what the hell I was doing.
Yeah, the first time I played Live Alive was like that. Final Fantasy V.
Is it the first ActRaiser that's not released in America?
No, the first ActRaiser
something
is
in that. It's something in that vein that I was playing that I just was like, man, I really wish I could play like the first game of this, but it was never released in America. So then I just downloaded the ROM and used a guide the whole time.
Yeah, I'll have the name. Because I didn't get to play the game, I didn't want to go much deeper into it. That's probably going to be this next week of gaming, is trying to play through a Japanese game that by all accounts seems to be like kind of a Super Mario where you'll play in the one level and then you'll move to the next one that you open up. I don't know though. I'm just excited because it's like the Legend of the Mystical Ninja games starring Goemon. But the really crazy thing to me is that this game came out in November and already has 100% English translation. And even as late as 2019, some of the SNES Goemon games were still only in Japanese. Like, no one had translated them to English.
Mhm.
Like, it just really talks about how our world has changed in terms of trying to make games more global. And not just like Japanese games to America, but American games to all corners of the globe, which is very cool to me. That like there are Brazilian translations so that like the dialect is correct. I love it. Gaming can be an international activity now.
Yeah, fine.
And somehow, this is what happens with me with Momodoras and Metroidvanias. An hour has already gone by of the save report. So apologies. Now I get to take another L. I had asked Sejohn to read the Spider-Woman comic from 1999, the introduction of Maddie Franklin. Very difficult to find anywhere where it was available online. And when I did eventually find it, it didn't work for Sejohn. So
I was able to get through some parts of it. The problem was that there were some commerce supported funding that was getting in the way of me reading the entire thing. But let me put it this way: I was at least able to get to page 15, Dev.
Yeah, interesting that he shows up on page 15. I had forgotten how big a deal Spider-Man actually is in that first issue of the third volume of Spider-Woman books. I'd also forgotten, I always thought that Charlotte Whittier, the fourth Spider-Woman, developed her powers as part of the Gathering of Five. No. Dr. Octopus created her to go out and steal the spider powers of the other three Spider-Women so that he could use her to defeat Spider-Man. Because, of course, that's what the story was. Because Doc Ock is in love with Spider-Man. We all know this.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, man, essentially, we had a big conversation about Madam Web and about the ways in which I think there's going to be some real problems regarding the lack of, or perceived lack of, Spider-Man in it. But some interesting stuff has happened over the last little week.
Yeah,
Not only did we all come to the realization that Spider-Man's a pretty big fucking part of the Spider stories, but on top of all of that, there's a chance that Sony might agree.
Yeah, there's a big old leak, and Tobey Maguire's stunt man was seen on set for Madam Web. So who knows if we might actually see Spider-Man and Madam Web.
I could see a world in which if I was doing not a Spider-Man story, but a Spider hero story, and wanted to have a guy on set for the stunt work that knew a damn thing or two about doing it, bringing in this guy who Sony is already connected to, having produced those first Raimi movies anyway, like, I could see that guy being there for other reasons other than the fact that Spider-Man may be in the movie, right? I mean, like, we cannot deny he's not solely a Tobey Maguire Spider-Man stunt double. He does other shit, guys.
He is specifically Tobey Maguire's stunt double. That scene in the Cider House Rules where he falls down the stairs, it was the same guy. This is all a lie. None of this is true. That scene in October Sky where he blows his fingers off, that was the stuntman's fingers getting blown off. Also a lie. But it would be very funny if Tobey Maguire had a stuntman-like relationship a la Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Yeah. I was just thinking, I was like, this isn't a Tarantino movie. There's other reasons for that guy to be there. I'm not even necessarily talking about that. I'm talking about the idea that, like, there's a lot of stuff going on in the comic book film, like, online fandom realm. Sorry. I'm trying not to talk. Cesspit is really the word I want to use. That's what I'm trying not to go there, though.
Sejohn, I did lead off this conversation with, I woke up at 4 and fell into a cesspit of fandom, right?
Yeah,
with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Something that, like, I love, and I have such deep connections to, like, people behind the scenes of making the Ninja Turtles work. And, like, waking up to... I mean, the big thing that I woke up to there, and we'll get back to Madam Web, because that's what we're talking about now, is the IDW series is ending after 150 issues. And at the start, they credit it to only one of the writers and artists who worked on the series, as if they've been there the entire
We're talking
time.
about Turtles now, right?
We're talking about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and IDW.
Yeah. Right.
That's what I woke up to was...
Well, you said IDW, but like there was a part of me for a hot second where I was like, wait, were you reading Madam Web IDW comics?
That'd be
no, I see what you're saying.
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and they're like, this artist's run coming to an end with issue 150. And I'm like, well, but it's not. There have been other people before her. So it's weird that the way that they presented it made it seem like this was the only creative voice behind this series for 150 issues.
Was she like a major producer? I mean, like this is like talking like Doctor Who, where like guys like Russell T Davies get the overarching creative credit, but like Russell T Davies didn't write every episode of season 1, right? Mm-hmm. Is it like that where like they are the creative head of this thing?
I mean, they worked on it. They came in around like issue 8 to do a bit of a storyline. That's actually not true. The reason why I'm not working in absolutes is because like I said, I'm not studied enough in it. But you want to talk about the cesspool, like these are people who like say they love the Turtles, and really this creative voice has been sort of like the lead, or I mean what's the showrunner since issue 100. They took it into it, but from issues 1 to 100 it was one specific like show lead for the series.
Yeah.
So it's like, well, that's kind of weird because it's erasure of the other people who've worked on this series, including Kevin Eastman. Like, just hanging it on the hat of this one creator erases the fact that Kevin Eastman was there and came up with a lot of the stories that happened in the IDW of it. But then going through and just the way that people were talking about it, because some people are like, she wasn't the only one who worked on it. It started in this person's hand with the assistance of Eastman, but then like they say something that's like hateful, and it's like, so like you're trying to make a good point, but then you got to use hate speech. So like, thanks for that.
What's wild about this is the ways in which you can see this exact same thing happening over in comic book movies specifically, and the ways in which things are referred to as like the Snyderverse, despite the fact that like there were other directors, there are other writers, right? Or people want to talk about how Feige has run Marvel and talked about how certain movies have not landed for them, and don't seem to be talking about the specifics of like when people want to talk about these things as a whole, right? They will talk about their problem with all Marvel movies, and it's like you realize that there's like a lot of different people involved and a lot of different creative voices, and like what you say about the thing as a whole never really seems to apply to all of them. It seems to apply to maybe the one you saw, but it doesn't seem to, right? And it sounds like a lot of that sort of shit, right? Where it's just like, oh yeah, well, the way this person's been running the boat, like this happened under their watch. And it's like, yeah, but it's not like they just like get to say to this person, like, okay, this is the story I want you to tell, now tell it. Like, that's not how it works. Like, even as the head of, even though they are the captain of the ship, like, they are still kind of like, not responsible wholly for every single thing that happened in that time, right?
Yeah. When she took over, there was already like a bit of plot in place. That part of her taking over was, we want you to finish this plot out. And then where it went from there, like, I understand some of the criticisms, and then some of the people being like, well, that can't be true. Why would she do that? And then I'm familiar with her before she worked with IDW, where a lot of it was fan fiction, where she inserted characters who are similar to a character who has been added to the series. So like, it's that whole conversation of eventually fandoms go on so long that it's not just the creators who are working on it, but fans of the creation. And then we kind of see it through their lens of what they would want, especially something like Doctor Who. When you talk about like Russell T Davies, he's like, I always wanted this to happen, or I always wanted this for the Doctor. Ditto when Steve Moffat took over, and he's like, when I was a kid, these are the stories I wanted to have told in Doctor Who. And it's like, see, but like, that's not necessarily the stories that Doctor Who wanted to be telling. Right? And
yeah.
I mean,
but that becomes really weird anyway, because like we talk about these things as if they are like these like bastions of great art, you know. And I don't want to keep bashing on Doctor Who, but there's other stories out there. Star Trek is another great example where we have people that are making shows like Discovery nowadays, and there's a lot of fans or Picard, Lower Decks, right, where a lot of fans will be like, man, this really feels like this is just fan fiction for what the series is writ large, and isn't bringing anything to the table that expands the universe, but rather just kind of cannibalizing the rest of it and stuff like all of these kinds of negative reactions to this stuff. And there's an interesting thing about this idea of like, well, if you really want to get into it, all Star Trek has been fanfic since fucking Next Generation, since the movies even. Like Gene Roddenberry has not been around for all of Star Trek. Like so like where does that really start and how does this work when like again, this gets back to the idea that there are teams of artists working on these things, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't want this to sound like this is like an apologist for like anybody that is like a creative head. Like if they are going to be, as I said earlier, the captain of the ship, like they should be kind of the lightning rod to get this kind of criticism because they are responsible. They take on that responsibility when they take that role, right? But to always monolithically talk about these artists as if they are the ones that were just like working in the fucking dregs the whole time getting this shit out there, that's what leads to a lot of problems in the industry where we start to ignore the fact that there are teams of people working on this shit. Whether it's because we've kind of assume that it's one person. We don't really think about the time and effort that like hundreds of people behind the scenes are putting in to do this stuff. We forget like there are people that are up late, not going home to see their families. We forget that there are people that are being harassed in really inappropriate ways because we are not thinking about the teams of people behind this stuff. We are just constantly focused on this one person as like the face of this whole thing. Or like when decisions get made in a movie that this person might not have had really much to do with other than the fact that they might have signed off on it. And again, take that responsibility. You're supposed to. But like the idea that like this one person's views on the world, like Neil Druckmann with The Last of Us is something that really comes to mind when I think about this. The ways that people really want to lean into Neil Druckmann is like all of the quote unquote political decisions made in those games. And they really want to apply those politics then to him as a person. And there's so many problems with that, not least of which that there's hundreds of people working at Naughty Dog that I'm sure had their hands on this at some point that like really finesse things one way or another depending on their own personal politics. You can't apply them all to him.
I mean, we briefly touched on the new Ted miniseries that just came out on Peacock on the same day that Momodora Moonlit Farewell released, January 11th, 2024. And
it was your birthday, Dev. They just got to you a little late.
They stripped it out on my birthday, and then it all arrived a week later. Which most of my presents are like that because it's Christmas. I get it. You're busy with Christmas. It's just nice to have one people remember on the actual day. I will say that as somebody like in the wave of Christmas and within the shadow of Christmas as a birthday, it means a lot to hear from somebody. Happy birthday, man. Here's like a pizza. Thank you for this pizza. Thank you for this birthday pizza. It means a lot. But yeah, so all
if
that
I can remember what day it was, period, I might be in a better position than I am currently.
Yeah, good job, brother. I'm proud of you. But yeah, so that came out, and afterwards we've watched through the whole series, and we had the normal discussion about Seth MacFarlane of like he really can't do any wrong, and then this family always goes to well, except for A Million Ways to Die in the West, but then like now that we've seen everything where he is unfettered in his creativity and not like weighed down by studio decisions, but let's be honest, that kind of failed because they weren't letting Seth be Seth on that one.
Yeah, and that always kind of that there's always going to be that cream of the crop, right? That auteur that comes to the top, and this is going to sound like I'm just like bowing at the altar of Seth MacFarlane, and that's not the case. I have some issues with some of his choices in the world. I don't love like a lot of the edgier stuff that he feels he needs to bring to the table all the time. Some of that's not him. Some of it is though. That kind of thing. But at the same time, there is a definite Seth MacFarlane style that I think is successful, and to get in the way of that is, I think, silly. Much in the same way I think about the same way with Guillermo del Toro or
Right.
even Quentin Tarantino, who I don't love, but I cannot deny like has proven that he kind of needs to just have his own space sometimes, right? Like Nolan is somebody that I will always kind of forgive in that same way too, right? People can talk up and down about how they hate like his sound mixing and that his movies are too long and all this other stuff, and that's fair, that's fine. I still think that that Nolan has proven that he kind of deserves that space, right? We should be still talking about him in 10 years, and it should be able to be a pure conversation about the Nolan vision, right? And we will be able to do that, thankfully, now, because
Right.
people have given him that space. I will say this, we need more of those kinds of spaces for people of
Other
color, for women.
yes.
You
For
know,
creative people, it shouldn't just be, white males who get that privilege, the Spielbergs, the Scorseses, the Nolans, the Tarantinos. I gotta
right.
stop listing them because it's every word that comes out of my mouth is making me sadder and sadder.
No, yeah, we've got more and more of them out there
Yeah.
nowadays, right? Like you have Jordan Peele, right? I
Yep.
mentioned Guillermo del Toro. I mean, even to that point, Robert Rodriguez, a contemporary of Tarantino, was always a great bastion of Mexican filmmaking and stuff like that, right? Like, so there's definitely ones out there to go find, but we need more of them to be just to be blunt.
Yes. But just going in terms that Seth takes the brunt because he is that figurehead, and it really does, now that he's proven himself, even as going far back as Ted 2, with the fact that, like, wow, that was really good. Was it good because he went back to the world of Ted, or was it good because he didn't have the oversight that he clearly had on what to do, like A Million Ways to Die in the West? And then we have the Orville, where, again, completely unfettered, I think he wrote every episode except for 3. Like, some crazy number of the Orville was all written by Seth MacFarlane, and that's why we're probably not going to get any more Orville, because, like, it took a lot out of him to do that.
Yeah.
And then watching something like this is like, no, it feels like what we can now look at A Million Ways to Die in the West as Seth MacFarlane had an idea, wanted to write it, but the studios were like, no, you can't do that. No, you can't do that. Why do you think you could do that? No, we have this to be marketable. Could you make it a PG-13? No. But they tried, and I don't know. I need to rewatch that movie. The book was so good, and the book is clearly, a movie studio cannot fuck with a book. Movie studios fuck with books all the time.
You even mentioned Tarantino in I keep wanting to not A Million Ways to Die in the West. What's the Once Upon a Time in Hollywood?
Yeah,
and like how he put the novel version of that book out because he himself edited things out of that movie, and he was like, man, yeah, I even hate when I edit myself now. So he put a book out to talk to like cover some of the bases of things, and openly talks about how that book is really the story he wanted to be on screen, but he just couldn't.
But he himself couldn't do it. Yeah.
Right.
There's the imagination is still the greatest medium for some arts, which that was cool to say. I liked that. But yes, so going to Madam Web, I take the L on being like, those books happened without Spider-Man. Wrong. False. And I am coming here to say, I'm sorry, I forgot about that. Where those books really take off is when they get away from Spider-Man, and like they actually talk about the Gathering of Five and how Maddie got her powers and how like it reinvigorated Cassandra Webb and all that stuff. Yeah. But even then, like, that book is so tied to Spider-Man in the fact that Maddie Franklin, Spider-Woman numero tres, lives with J. Jonah Jameson. He is her legal guardian.
Yeah, and I mean, the way the movie's gonna go about it, they're gonna have to. I cannot see them being in a world where they've already in this universe hinted at Spider-Man, right? That post-credit scene of Vulture and like that sort of thing. They've already acknowledged that he's part of this. And to go this far into it, to be kind of riding the coattails of a multiverse style Spider-Man movie and across the Spider-Verse, right? Like I don't want to label it as that right now until we get to see it, but it's kind of hard to not think about the ways in which this feels very much like they're kind of trying to lean into the success of Spider-Verse in like, let's just bring a bunch of Spider people together, could even point to the last Disney Marvel Spider-Man, No Way Home.
No Way Home.
Was that the one? Yeah. Like that kind of thing, right? Like there's too many things ghosting forward into this film that you kind of have to address Spider-Man in some way, right? My only question is, I just don't know, and I don't know if we will ever truly know the full machinations of this deal, but like what Sony can and can't say. Because I know that a huge part of this whole thing with them doing this whole Sinister Six verse that they've been kind of putting together, like part of the deal I always understood it is they couldn't really kind of lean on Spider-Man or mention him. But then that whole post-credit scene in, is it Venom 2 that one is, or is
No,
it Morbius?
Mobius. Morbius.
Mobius.
Morbius.
Morbius. Mobius.
Morbius.
Yeah,
Morbius, the
Morbius.
living vampire. Yeah.
Yeah, like the post-credit scene where we suddenly have the Vulture and that mention there, and then bringing Venom into some of the stuff going on in some of the post-credit scenes in the Marvel stuff, like in the Marvel Disney stuff. It's weird. Like the relationship has always been squishy, and we've never fully truly understood it. It's just that, like, people are like, Sony is kind of the last place where I think we're going to be seeing some of these Marvel movies for a while. I have a sneaking suspicion that we're going to see a real dial back in a lot of places with comic book movies in general. I'm laughing because there's no way that everybody's feeling this right now, right? There's no way I'm alone in that thought. Right?
Oh, well,
Is we're about to see some dialing back in a lot of ways. Sony is the only one that I think is going to keep pressing on this because they've clearly shown that they don't give a shit what the rest of the market's doing. They're just going to do what they want.
well, couple of things.
That's what they've been doing with this whole thing, right? So I'm very curious to see how much further they're willing to go, and if they're going to take this opportunity with everybody else dialing back, Disney Marvel included in that, to maybe say like we're going to start saying Spider-Man again. Let's see how far we can take this. Essentially,
Right. I mean, a couple of things. First of all, one of the reasons why Sony is all ahead full with these movies is because they were finished. These are movies that they had, but then they had to push because of everything being delayed due to the strike and marketing and everything like that. We are supposed to have already had a Kraven the Hunter film, which is insane that, like, timeline-wise, Kraven apparently happens before Madam Web, but I guess there's just no references, or they're fine with those references coming up after the fact. I'm very excited to see if anything happens with that, especially because Cassandra Webb has a lot of connection to the Kravenoffs in terms of her being hunted by his sister and mother in like one of her earliest appearances. It's just crazy to me. The other thing about it is we don't know the full extent of what went down in the wake of No Way Home. Remember that No Way Home wasn't going to happen until Tom Holland came to the table and was like, "Hey guys, can we just do it? I want to be Spider-Man again."
100%.
Like,
People
yeah.
need to recognize, like this is not an apology for Disney. This is not
No,
saying
yeah.
that Disney's not partially responsible. Disney, so Disney Marvel and Warner Brothers, DC and Sony Marvel are all equally to blame as far as I'm concerned in this kind of downfall of the comic book movie that we're in the middle of right now, right? And a huge like turning point is definitely that moment when Sony tried to throw their dick on the table and swing it at Disney, and Disney fucking slapped it away like it was a fucking ping pong ball. Like Sony really like had to go lick their wounds for a while after that bullshit. But when they said we're pulling Spider-Man from your shit, and Disney was like, "Fine, we can do it without him." Like, we'll just like because I was thinking about this just this morning. The original idea that Spider-Man was really going to step into the Tony Stark role, right? Like Peter was going to step into the Tony Stark role to the point where we see him receive all of Tony's shit, right? Like this whole idea that they were going to build the whole next arc and universe around him. And then when they said no, Disney was like, "Fine, we'll figure out a way to do it without him." Now, there's an argument to be made that they didn't succeed in that.
Oh, there's an argument
right?
to be made? That kind of just seems like the evidence, Sejohn.
Yeah, right. I mean, like, right, that idea that Disney did not succeed. But I think that the larger thing to consider is that Disney always knew that this was a possible outcome, but their point to Sony was, we don't even care if that's what happens, right? Like, it wasn't just, we can figure this out without Spider-Man. It's, we can figure this out or we don't. Who gives a shit? We're Disney, right? And a lot of people want to look at this like downfall of everything that's going on and pointing to Disney's bad year in movies and stuff like that. But like, and act like, oh, because they didn't have a billion-dollar movie, Disney is somehow like floundering. No, Disney's good, guys. One bad year sucks for them. I'm not saying that they're happy about what happened this year, but like, they'll be okay.
I mean, they had a better year than Warner, so
yeah. But there's this whole like kind of like story in people's minds right now that this past year kind of really hurt them, and the loss of this like Marvel momentum has really kind of hurt them for the foreseeable future and stuff like that. And that might be true, but I think Disney was always kind of prepared for this being a possible outcome, not the ideal one for sure. But from that moment when they told Sony that they could fuck off with their Spider-Man stuff, and they basically at that point completely turned tail on the whole Spider-Man being the center of the Marvel universe, that was kind of the kickoff of this downfall.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying that if Sony had not done that, we would be in a better position as Marvel fans or as DC fans or any of that shit. No, I think we still would have gotten to this point where we felt like we were getting too much and it was all really thin, right? Which is essentially what happened. We were getting too much too often, and none of it seemed to be meaningful anymore. And I can admit that as somebody that even still enjoys some of the fluff that we have gotten, I can definitely admit that none of it feels nearly as impactful as it did 10 years ago, right? I think that we still would have gotten to that point, but something needed to set it off, right? Somebody needed to shoot Archduke Ferdinand, right, to set off this entire fucking series of events, and like that was Sony. As far as I'm concerned, that was the moment where this stuff really started to kind of froth to the top. Was when Sony was like, "We're going to see how far we can push this," and it's part of the reason why I go back to saying I think they're going to be the ones to continue to push it further than anybody. Is that they have shown that they are not afraid to go to burn it all to the ground in order to see what they can do next.
Right, and they got their torches going at full blast in terms of like Venom into Morbius, into Venom 2, into... Is there another one? Is there another movie in this thing, or is it just Madam Web? I feel like there's 4, but is there really only 3? Yeah, I'm thinking of Craven as the fourth one, huh? That just doesn't exist. Maybe. Jeez. I really thought there was another one. No, that's it. It has just been the 3 in this incredibly weird sort of universe of movies that, oh yeah, they all exist in the same universe. Don't worry about it. But they don't necessarily reference each other the way that the Marvel ones did. Maybe eventually. Yeah. Like, I don't know. We don't know. So if Spider-Man were to show up, that could just be the outcome of the fact that they're like, you're not getting him in your movies anymore. And enough time has finally passed for them to do it. Or,
and if we want to dive full on into the conspiracy theory, like it being a Tobey Maguire Spider-Man is a softer landing for them than most. Let's put it that way, right?
Yeah.
Right. If they were to say, well, this is the Raimi Spider-Man, this is our Spider-Man. Of course Spider-Man's in it. And of course it's this Spider-Man because this is Sony's Spider-Man, right? And like being able to kind of use that to pull fans along. I think they're going to say, like, is that enough to kind of push Disney to just let us just do what we want with this thing all along, which is to have this, like, the Sinister Six versus Spider-Man story that they've always wanted to tell.
Right. And that'd be pretty cool if old Tobey Maguire Spider-Man, who had to have his back cracked in No Way Home, is fighting like a youthful sort of reinvigorated Sinister Six.
Well, you know why? Because then that gives them the opportunity to bring in a Miles Morales, to bring in like these, right? Like
to bring in the Spider Women.
They can bring up a Spider team, right? Like the idea that they can then do like a bad guy versus good guy team fight. Like really can it's a wild way to do it, but man, fuck me, we've seen that the other ways don't necessarily pan out, so let's see what they can do.
And while I will say I do take the L in saying Spider-Man wasn't necessary for this 3rd volume of Spider-Women, it is undeniable that the Madam Web film is borrowing from Cassandra Webb collecting together 3 Spider-Women to help her solve a problem. Like that's how the book starts. And then you're right, page 15, Spider-Man being like, I wonder how that girl I saved a week ago who was a super fan of mine is doing.
Like, to point out, that's not the first time he's mentioned in the book. It's just that there is a full page spread of Spider-Man flipping through the city.
Yeah. It's true. He is mentioned before that, and you said, how do you do it without mentioning him? And honestly, now more than ever, I think it is. Or they're just going to sell it on very seductive Dakota Johnson looking at the camera spots with Russian subtitles. Because that broke Twitter long enough to make there be a Seinfeld-themed meme about it.
I just, like... I'm trying to figure out like how I understand that sex is used in marketing all the time, right?
Oh, is
I
it?
just
Now that we
is it
have your
is
attention, vote for Bart
but there has
Simpson.
to be I have to wonder if there's some like echoing of fucking 50 Shades coming through, right? Like, well, we've got Dakota Johnson here. We might as well really lean into this dominatrix
Oh,
side of Madam Web in the marketing, right? Like, I don't know. I like it's also very much part of the character, so I don't know. Maybe
Sejohn.
I'm
If we
maybe it's
didn't
digging a
know,
little too deep.
if we didn't know who was playing Ezekiel Sims, I would like be at a 75% that it was going to be Jamie Dornan.
Yeah.
Like just to bring them back together. It's coming out on Valentine's Day release. The guy's in like a full black suit, semi gimp inspired looking. Like it's not a Spider-Man suit. It's just like kind of black leathery suit that he's wearing. If he pulled off his suit and it were Jamie Norman and this was 50 Shades of Spidey, I'd be fine with that. But
Yeah.
I don't think that's going to happen. But they're certainly going to market it that way, and people lost their minds. And as
It's such a shame
Costanza
that
said,
Sony couldn't keep their shit together because if they had been able to do a movie like this and tie it to a world where like this is going to be me going off on my fandom bullshit for a second.
go
So
for it,
like
please.
but like that idea that like if we were in a world post Spider-Man where somehow we had lost Spider-Man and so what happens at the end of No Way Home but in like a larger context of like they could have tweaked the ending of No Way Home where we didn't just lose Peter, we also lost Spider-Man and nobody remembered who Peter was, but everybody's just like, but what happened to Spider-Man? Where like there's no Spider-Man, and that's a world in which all these spider people begin to like pop up. Like imagine that through line. It would make Madam Web so much more interesting to me and I imagine to a lot of people out there if there was like a just open acknowledgement of this was a world in which Spider-Man did exist but now for some reason he has not been around, right? And that leads to this like this outburst of people like taking on like the mantle essentially and trying,
Nature abhors a vacuum.
right. I mean like it's such it's a the fact that there's so many shortcuts they could have taken in making this movie if they had just left well enough alone and had allowed themselves to continue to just kind of piggyback off of some of the Marvel Disney stuff, they'd be in a such better position to put this movie out for a fan like me. I'm curious how many other people feel that way. I'm curious how it's like Sony views it, like because the fact that it is not related to that is one of the most astounding parts of this whole movie, and honestly, one of the most interesting parts. So maybe this is all working, right? Like I don't have much more interest in the Madam Web stuff, other than the fact that I am so curious to see how they tie it to Spider-Man or not. And that says some things about me. It says some things that I might need to reflect on. But like this idea that like it isn't about the fact that it's like a female team. I'm all for that, but like I've got other movies that already do that fit that bill for me, just like within the past year. So there needs to be a hook to it now. Like we've gotten past the point where I've gotten a good couple of fills of like some badass like female film like action films, and like woman oriented is really the better term, or like I don't know what the better way to say it, but like there is that already exists now. So now we need to start kind of moving in a different direction or a more focused direction, right? And if the focus on this one is Marvel Spider-Man stuff, okay, but it's not. It's this weird nebulous comic book universe that can't possibly be the Marvel universe without like acknowledging some stuff, right? So what is it? They've got me. I am intrigued only because I need to see how the fuck they're going to pull this off.
I can't wait till we talk about it. That's where I'm at. There's also the fact that I will always bring this up. J. Jonah Jameson was going to be in Venom, played by J.K. Simmons, and then they're like, no, that'll be too confusing to people. If they had done that, amazing. Just would have been an amazing thing to have had happen. And here's my prediction. Everything that we have seen from Venom through to Madam Web is going to have taken place while Spider-Man was flipping in the MCU. While Tobey Maguire was over there helping Tom Holland. Because he gets pulled through, right? We don't know how time moves in all the universes. Maybe the axis spins faster in the Sony Spider-Man universe. So we'll find out. That would be very cool. If he swings in at the end because he has completed his business with Tom Holland in the MCU, and he's like, what the fuck happened while I was gone?
Yeah. Maybe they'll do something like that. I don't know.
We'll find out,
it sucks because I do wish that I had an interest in this film beyond
Beyond
the
that one,
male-oriented. Yeah, beyond the male-oriented part. But like Sony just hasn't earned that from me. I feel like there are better filmmakers out that are doing these women-oriented like types of stories. I don't need this half-assed attempt from Sony Marvel. I just don't trust them to do it well, right?
Yeah.
But they're gonna do it, and I'll see it, and hey, maybe it'll surprise me. Maybe it'll be like a really well-made, thoughtful exploration of this sort of thing, you know?
I really want to find someone else who is excited for this movie because they read those 18 issues of comic books back 24 years ago. 25 years ago. Jesus, it's been 25 years since Maddie Franklin and the whole story of Spider-Woman 3 happened.
So maybe that's a better way for me to be viewing this, right? Is like to remove some of the other shit about it and look at the fact that like clearly somebody working on this movie gives a shit about these characters and these stories.
Yeah.
If this is the kind of stuff that they're going to reference in the storytelling, you know, like looking back, 25 years to find a meaningful like story that contains these characters and using that as their baseline.
Yeah.
It's not something we always see in these movies. So like I should be celebrating that, right? Like that's a really cool idea.
It's just it happens to be not that well known. It's not like the Infinity Gauntlet. We all kind of knew about the Infinity
Or well
Gauntlet.
advertised. Like, if not for you telling me this kind of stuff, I don't think that it would ever be brought to my attention.
Right.
It would have been like an IMDb trivia fact I would have found out 5 years from now when I had some more solidified opinion one way or the other, so it probably wouldn't change it much, right?
Right. And honestly, when I heard Madam Web, I'm like, and everybody's freaking out the trailer. I'm like, whatever. And it wasn't until I saw the trailer before the Marvels when I'm like, oh my God, that's the story they're doing? That's incredible.
Yeah.
And that's when I got to this like fervorous excitement to see it. And it's coming out. It's a month away, people. So I know as soon as I can get my tickets, I'm getting my tickets and I'm seeing it. Because I need to know. And then the last thing, and then we can transition to another topic or maybe wrap this up, start thinking about that, is the fact that Madam Web in the comics is a mutant. And at this point, mutants are the exclusive property of Disney. So they have to make her not a mutant. Which is an entirely, like a whole other kettle of fish to have to deal with. Her going from like being an Omega level mutant who can literally see and affect the threads of fate. And like, I got bit by a spider and now I can see it affect the threads of fate. Well, that doesn't really make sense. You sure you're not like a mutant? Don't say that word. We're going to get sued.
Yeah.
Like it is.
I'm attuned. What?
I'm inhuman. No, we can't really say that one either. Even though it was a financial disaster, we really can't use that one either. I'm a metahuman. You can't say that either.
Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. really took that term back and really gave it some more oomph.
Yeah. I don't know, but it is such an incredible like case study on where we are with everything. But you talk about people being tired of it. The fact that Echo was released all at once on Disney Plus and Hulu and is under a completely new brand, the Marvel Spotlights, really says a lot about how the company itself feels about what they have in their hands right now.
Yeah, the Marvel Spotlights has been interesting. That's what Werewolf by Night had been released under, and the Christmas special, the Guardians of the Galaxy Christmas special was a Marvel Spotlight as well, right?
No. Those are specials. Those are MCU special events.
No, the thing that the like tag before them, I'm pretty sure was Marvel Spotlight, right?
I thought Echo was the first Marvel Spotlight thing.
Oh, maybe I was misunderstanding how they were doing this because essentially the way that I understood it was what Marvel Spotlight meant was like it was kind of like a Kind of like the idea of special event. Like this is a one-off thing. Like do not expect this to continue in any way. So that's why like things like Werewolf by Night coming out under a different tag than just Marvel. Like that being maybe it was special event, but there being a different tag on Werewolf by Night was like pretty much an understanding like this is all you're getting is just this one-off thing. We may bring the character back in some way, but as far as what this story is, this is it. It's one and done. And then the same thing happened with the tagging of the Christmas special. So I had kind of been following Echo with this understanding that it was going to be part of this whole thing where like this is just an interesting mini series for this character. We're not coming back to it to kind of differentiate it from the stuff like WandaVision and Miss Marvel and stuff like that, where they wanted to, those are being released with the idea that they are true canon. Like, there's not going to be there's possibly going to be seasons upon seasons of this, things like that. And I think that it comes from kind of WandaVision and a lot of people wondering if they're going to continue that story at the time, wondering if there was going to be a season 2 and always looking for a season 2. They created this whole other category of Marvel like one-offs so that people would kind of stop having that conversation basically as a way to like cut fans off at the pass. Which is what I kind of get the impression of with Echo is that this is not some story that they're hoping to continuously move on, but they really wanted to make this, which is, I think, kind of interesting because like this idea that like there is no intention of tying this further into the universe. There's no intention of continuing this. It's kind of nice, right? To be able to watch that stuff and not be so invested in like, how does this all fit, right?
Yeah. So Werewolf by Night is a Marvel Studios special presentation. As is Guardians of the Galaxy Christmas special. Marvel Spotlight is an initiative designed to showcase individual projects, all characterized by their grounded and character-driven storytelling approach, starting with Echo. And then currently the other two that are in the Spotlight, that was fun. I liked how I did that. Is Wonder Man, which is, we're not sure when that's coming, and Daredevil Born Again. So it's a whole new brand for the Marvel stuff, the Spotlight.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, like, I'm curious to see what they do with this series then. Like, if this is going to be like the fine wine series, kind of like DC's Black Label, right? And Marvel, well, kind of Marvel Knights, but Marvel Knights was really more of an excuse for them to just say dirty words.
Yeah. So my guess is it's going to be closer to Black Label than Knights, but mostly with the violence and the content. These are all TVMA rated. So I haven't watched Echo yet because that also came out this past week. I believe it dropped on the 9th, or maybe it came out last weekend. When we were recording, the 6th. It came out January 6th. So now I want to confirm that. I'm sorry. Let me just bring that back up, team.
But yeah, they dropped the 5-episode series, right? And they dropped the entire series at once.
Yeah, but I would like to get the date if possible, so I don't feel like I'm completely wrong. January
sure, man,
9th.
I'm riffing.
I got you. Yeah, January 9th they dropped. I should have just trusted myself. Yeah, January 9th is when all 5 episodes of Echo Season 1 dropped. And we'll see what happens from it. I haven't gotten a chance to watch it, mostly because I was finishing Fubar on Netflix.
Nice.
Did you do Fubar?
The Arnold Schwarzenegger one about his like daughter and him like teaming up, right?
Yeah. True Lies 2. Yeah. But in a separate universe.
True Lies.
Gosh, it was so.
I have not seen everything in that show, but fuck, who plays the therapist? Is it Matt Walsh?
It's Scott Thompson of the Kids in the Hall.
It's Kids in the Hall. But the fucking puppet scene is like the one on rotation on YouTube right now. And that's pretty wonderful. I gotta tell you, I'm excited to watch it.
Sarika from AP Bio is on the team too.
I thought this had come out, and I thought it had been a movie. I must be thinking of a different...
let me tell you the story about Fubar and why the Decker family watched it. So my father, because of his cancer treatment, is full of piss and vinegar on Fridays. Literally, they put so much like steroids and adrenaline and other like uppers into his body that he is unable to sleep. So it is midnight and I'm like, maybe I'll go to bed. And he's like, no, I'm going to put this thing on. We should watch it. And it's Fubar. And I am convinced that it is a movie. Like, I'm like, yeah, I'll watch a movie with Dad at midnight, and that'll be fun. And we're watching, and I'm starting to fall asleep. I'm like, all right, I can't finish this movie, but I'm really into it. If you want to, like, plan out a time to watch it, he goes, Devon, this is a series. And I'm like, what? This is so cinematic. Like, this movie isn't about to just, like, wrap up in another 45 minutes. He's like, no, this is a series. And I'm like, well, if this is a series, we need to stop watching it because your daughter will love this because she loves True Lies. It's one of her favorite films. And your wife will love this because she really liked True Lies, the TV series, but was upset that it was the same story every week. And in the friggin' 45 minutes we've watched of this show, it's been 4 stories already. So we got to try it out. So we did it as a family, and Fubar is excellent. It is just very, very good. And yeah, and it's Aparna Brielle who played Sharika. Sharika from AP Bio. And that's not a name. What's her name? I'm going to get her name correct. Sarika. There's no H. And it was just awesome to see her acting again. The story is really good. Great actors are in it. Blast. And it ends on this beautiful cliffhanger, and it has been confirmed that it's getting a season 2. It's not one of those Netflix one and dones that ends on a cliffhanger. Cowboy Bebop. So, check it out if you love Arnold Schwarzenegger. But honestly, that is kind of the barrier for entry. If you're not interested in watching a TV series where Arnold Schwarzenegger plays every Arnold Schwarzenegger action hero.
I mean, it's a kind of a satire on like his shit. Like that's like kind of the vibe that seems to be going around, is that like it is Arnie poking fun at his past like self, right? And that's always fun to watch. I mean, I've always gotten the impression from like, you never know who these people are in real life. Like, I always want to put that caveat on all this shit whenever we talk about this. But like, if there was anybody that's had a good sense of humor about himself and about what he's gone through and the things that, his ups and his downs, like Arnold Schwarzenegger is definitely up there as one of the more like self-aware type of guys, right? And so seeing those guys in their later years reflecting on that stuff is always a fun time, because like, yeah, you're right there with them on some of the stuff that they call out themselves as being kind of cringy and things like that,
Well, I mean, like Commando is doing that in 85. He's like, yeah, like I've already kind of this joke. Let's lean into it with this movie. Yeah. Let's like turn it all up to 11. And then you got something like Last Action Hero that is really like self-reflective on like what that would do to a person. And if you expect that from a person in real life.
But I mean, even him doing all of the comedy movies that he did back in the 90s, the straight up comedies, I mean, the stuff he does with DeVito and Twins, but also Jingle All the Way.
Yeah.
Like he's really always throughout his, you're totally right. Like he's always been that guy that's been able to look at himself and laugh about it, for good or for ill in terms of some of the other stuff that he's done in life, Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I mean, it's an interesting, it's cool to see anybody in that position doing that kind of self-reflective work,
And it's not crap. Like, that's the other thing. It's like, sometimes when you do something that's like satirical, that stuff, you're like, the satire is going to carry it and, it'll just look how it looks. It's beautifully shot. The edits are wonderful. Like, it's the first Netflix series where I'm like, I understand why people were like, streaming is going to change television.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it seems to be the first, I mean, from what we've talked about over the years, it seems to be the first kind of Netflix series you've been into.
That wasn't animated, because I've watched a bunch of Netflix animated stuff, and
yeah, but I mean, like we never really got into like House of Cards, right? We never really talked about the
thank God we avoided Netflix House of Cards, Sejohn, because that would have just fallen on top of us.
In the grand scheme of things, sure, yeah, but man, the way that they handled like getting rid of him on that show was fucking wild. For a show that was not afraid to literally push characters in front of a moving train in order to just get them out of the way, right? Like the fact that they bent over backwards to still leave room for possibilities of him coming back. Anybody out there that wants to talk about Kevin Spacey being mistreated and like canceled, blah, 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 clearly wasn't paying attention. So many projects he was involved in at the time were doing what they could to leave room in case, right? The only real example that you can talk about him getting completely pulled is that one where Crispin Glover completely replaced him, right? Or not Crispin Glover. What's
Chris Plummer. Christopher Plummer. Oh,
Crispin Glover in heavy ass makeup as
Crispin
yeah.
Glover as all the money in the world guy. I don't
Yeah,
remember
yeah,
who.
yeah, but whatever the magnate is in that movie,
Yeah,
right? That's like the one thing that you can point to, and like like in that moment, what happened is a kind of a fucking wild story. But beyond that, like so many people wanted to leave the door open for Kevin Spacey, and it was just his crazy ass actions throughout everything that really slowly closed every single last one of them.
yeah.
Like, say what you will about the outcome of all of that shit, you cannot deny that he just got weirder and stranger as that shit went on, and he just was slamming doors behind him on the way.
Yeah. J. Paul Getty. That's who all the money in the
um,
world
so
was. So
I wanna use this to kind of transition into one thing that I did this week that I cannot stay quiet about.
please. Is it the
All of
beekeeper?
this, it is the fucking beekeeper, Devin.
I'm
I am a
s-
convert into the Church of Statham. That's not true. I've been there. I've been casually going on holidays for a while, but I think I am fully invested in the ritual now. You talk about like the satire and everything on display in Fubar, and the idea that it is kind of the celebration of like Arnold Schwarzenegger and his movies and stuff like that, right? It was I saw The Beekeeper this week, Dev, and it was one of those situations where I was sitting there watching this movie, and I think I was the only person in the room that was watching it as a comedy.
that
But here's the thing,
I want to
man.
just time out real quick with that. That was the mechanic for me. Like I watched the
Oh, see, the
mechanic,
mechanic.
the first mechanic, and I'm just like, this is awesome. And I'm like thinking like Crank when I'm watching the mechanic movies in terms of what he's doing. And my father's like, I don't know why you enjoy this, and I'm like, yeah, I know that it's like schlocky, but like that's part of the fun.
Right.
Timing, right? Like,
So the Beekeeper, like for anybody that didn't watch the mechanic that way, I think the Beekeeper is like trying to push that point even further, right? It was like walking out of that movie reminded me like walking out of like Death Proof, like back in like the original one with Charles Bronson there, not the totally separate entity that is the Quentin Tarantino one, but like or like watching the old Dirty Harry movies, you know, to do another Deadpool, right? Like the dead things like that, right? Like coming out of those old ass like 70s 80s action movies where it's just a guy and a gun taking on the world, and there's like a weird kind of not necessarily conservative slant, but definitely like anti like authority slant that leans a little too hard on the privileged white guy of the whole thing, like that kind of like there's all of this stuff going on in the Beekeeper that I was like, man, if they had just put some good film grain over this, I would have believed that this movie came out 40 years ago, right? So there's like that whole level to it. The dialogue is just like I somebody wrote this movie. Jason Statham took one look at it and was like, "This is what we're doing." He is on as the lead producer on this film. He was like, "This is the movie we're making." And like Snakes on a Plane style, like when Samuel L. Jackson was like, "If you change the name of this movie, I walk." Like I feel like that must have been the only way that some of this dialogue made it to screen. Is that Jason Statham was just like, "No, no, no. If you do a second draft of this film, I'm not making this film. This is the movie. This first draft ass piece of whatever is the movie that I am putting to screen. God damn it!" And like he commits, but like every other line is a B pun. Sometimes they don't even make sense. It doesn't matter. There is a point at which a body flies off of a bridge, and this is not too big of a spoiler. I actually think it's in like
it's in
the
the
Red Band
trailer.
trailer.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a point where a body flies off a bridge, and it is so clearly a mannequin, not even a dummy, because the arms are in a position that like is super weirdly like like inhuman. Like it is so clearly a dummy, and they just watch it for like a good 5 seconds. You're just watching this thing, and you're like, "That's not a human being. That's not a human being, guys. Cut away. That's not a human being." It's wild how much they just lean into just like this is what this movie is, guys, to the point where like the movie takes off like a fucking bullet and just ends so abruptly that you're just like, oh shit, we were along for for a fucking wild ride. I didn't even realize that like an hour and 40 minutes had passed. Like it was crazy how fast the movie just goes. It is so much fun and so crazy and so clearly Statham just making a quote unquote Statham movie. That shit happens that you just have to laugh at because it's so ridiculously not how movies are made nowadays, right? Like we just we have we there's I can't think of I'm sure CGI is used because CGI is used in every movie now, right? But I can't think of one of those like big egregious moments of like, oh, that helicopter's clearly not there, right? Like, no, none of that sort of shit. And like, there's these amazing fight scenes in like glass hallways, so you have all these like reflection shots, and like it felt like it just everything you want to see in like a crazy ass action movie where it's just a revenge story, just this like this guy just going ape shit on just everybody because like this woman that he kind of liked like got killed. There's also some John Wick to it in like the world building of the concept of the beekeeper and what that means. Every other person, oh my god, Jeremy Irons is in it as this big box of exposition, right? Every fucking scene with him starts with him looking at somebody and going, "You've upset a beekeeper, and you don't want to upset the bee. You've upset the hive, and now the beekeepers are out to get you." He is constantly reiterating this whole deep lore of the beekeeper, like 5 times throughout the movie. He tells the same fucking story.
He keeps the drones in order. If a drone steps out of line, we call the beekeeper.
And then like people show up in really hefty like hard hitters show up. Minnie Driver shows up in 2 scenes, less than 5 minutes of footage in the beginning of the movie.
That's
and
awesome.
you're just like, what and you and the shit she lays down feels like the groundwork for this like larger film that then doesn't happen because like a big boss shows up about 20 minutes into this movie. And the ways in which they build up to it, you kind of get the feeling like, oh, this is going to be the thing for the rest of this movie, is these two kind of going at it. No, he take care of it like pretty quickly. So like that doesn't even continue on. But it's okay because another plot picks right up.
Here comes the big boss. Let's get it on.
But the true highlight of the whole movie for me is The true highlight of the whole movie for me, though, is Josh Hutcherson. I have now seen 2 Josh Hutcherson movies in the last, like, 3 months apart from each other, and I am so on board with more of him just doing this weird, like, ride of these, like, you know, they're big films. Like, he did Five Nights at Freddy's at the end of last year, and now he's in this. And, like, there's a type of film going on here, right? Like, in a lot of ways, you can see kind of the early days of, like, Nick Cage and his whole straight to DVD, I have to do every movie that comes my way thing. You know, that we've talked before about Cage and the reasons why he lives that life and seems to really be enjoying it now. To the point where that's like kind of his shtick, right? You can see it in some of these younger actors kind of trying to do the same thing because they don't want to be part of the whole system, or for some reason they can't be. So you saw it in a lot of stuff going on with Robert Pattinson, definitely with Daniel Radcliffe, right? And so here's Josh Hutcherson being the one coming out of the Hunger Games series, kind of I think doing that same thing, right? Where he's going to do a lot of these kind of weirder films because he wants to be, and he fucking chews scenery and in what has to be a Logan Paul bit, right? Because the entire time I'm watching him, I'm like, oh, this guy is just like Zuckerberg, definitely in a lot of ways. Elon in a little bit, Elon Musk in a couple of ways, but the bigger thing is definitely the Logan Paul, Andrew Tate style, like YouTuber mindset of like, I'm going to teach you how to be, you know, like toxic and bullshit and all that sort of stuff, right? And he is just phenomenal as this character this entire movie, who is just upset the balance. And like Jeremy Irons has a lot of scenes with him where he's just like, "You're a fucking idiot," and he's just like, "Yeah, well, I pay you enough money to not say those things to me," and he's like, "No, you fucking," like the dialogue between the two of them is the wildest relationship for 2 like quote unquote like villains. I don't even know if Jeremy Irons really counts as a villain in the whole thing because he really doesn't do much except just explain to everybody what's going on.
Oh my god, it's the beekeeper.
Yeah. I had so much fucking fun at this movie, but I could not help but view it this entire time as like, this is ridiculous and they know it, right? Like you have to watch it in that way. And I feel like I'm not the only one that feels that way because the movie is also currently sitting at like a 92% audience rating on Rotten Tomatoes. Like it's wild that this like January release, like throwaway Jason Statham action movie, a lot of people are just kind of going to it and just being like, yeah, this is what I want right now. And with the state of where movies are in general, and like, you know, we talked a bit earlier about Disney not making the $1 billion mark this year and that being a big deal. We've talked in past episodes about how it feels like a lot of the big releases really dropped the ball. I mean, look at what happened with Aquaman. We haven't really addressed that since Aquaman 2 came out. You saw it, right? And you seem to enjoy it.
I loved it.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I would have loved it if I had watched Shazam 2 and The Flash and Blue Beetle, like, I had the opportunity to see Blue Beetle. It just slipped through my fingers, and we had a conscious discussion in this house. Are we going to watch those 3 movies before Aquaman 2, or are we just going to see it? And it's like, you know what? Let's just do Aquaman 2. And Aquaman 2 was so fucking good that the fact that, like, we walked out and we sat in the car and we're like, that's it, though. Like, that movie got it. Like, they finally understood how a comic movie should be made. And I'm talking Warner Brothers. I'm not talking Hollywood in general. I'm talking, like, Warner Brothers finally got that, like, comic book movies do not need to be hyper serious.
Yeah.
And it's like,
I mean, it's a real shame. Like, from everything that I've heard from anybody that's seen Aquaman 2, they've really enjoyed their time with it. Not nearly as much as you guys. I'm glad you guys did enjoy it, but like, people have definitely had some things to say about it that they didn't love. But at the same time, anyone that I've talked to that has seen it has seemed to have said, like, no, you should totally check it out. But I don't really, I can count on my one hand the number of people that have talked to me about it because they saw it, right? You guys actually double the number of people I know that have seen it.
That's hilarious to me.
Like,
unsurprising, but hilarious that we.
I mean, look at the money, right? Like, it just made fucking nothing. It just died on the vine, and it's a shame, you know. And in a lot of ways, like, it shut up a lot of people talking about how they felt like the Marvels was not like, essentially, there's been I have been saying that for the last year, that I've been worried about the release for the Marvels, not because of the quality of the movie one way or another, but just because the state of, like, people going to the movies right now. People are being much pickier about what they go to. And if it's not the biggest thing, like the Oppenheimer Barbie stuff, then it's nothing. People just aren't going to the theaters for stuff. And that has been the prime reason that Disney really fell flat this year, was they offered too many movies, and not a single one of them was an it film to go to, right? Which you can say, like, that's a sign of quality dipping at Disney, but I don't think that's true. I think it's just it's more of a sign of what people are willing to spend their money on and time and space on nowadays, right? With everything going on with COVID, like, coming back and shit like that, people are still very much conscious of, I don't want to go and sit in a movie theater right now, because, like, unless that movie is something so important that it's going to be my one this year, I'm not going to go. And for a lot of people, that was back with Barbie and Oppenheimer, right? But when the Marvels came out and fell on its face, and it did, like, there's no way to deny that it flopped,
fell on its face so much that, like, Disney disowned it. Like, that was, like, we talk about what happened with Aquaman 2, Disney being like, yeah, we wash our hands of this film. And it's like,
I mean, it's still in theaters around me. Like, this, all this shit about them pulling it from theaters doesn't, I don't see it happening around me.
It's not
like,
so much that they pulled it from theaters. It's that we're not going to market it anymore. We're gonna pull that stuff. It's not that they're like, we're taking it out of theaters, we're just counting it as a loss. It's the fact that, like, if you want to have it in your theater, we'll let you have it in your theater, but you're not getting any help from Disney driving people in there to watch it.
And we also have to remember that it was also one of its last movies in the fiscal year. Part of not the fiscal year, the annual year, which will become part of the fiscal year going forward. Is they basically are hitting that point where they're like, look, we're scraping bottom of the bucket in marketing funds as it is. We're not going to keep spending this money on this movie that's not making any money. This is not justifying any of this. It's just explaining. It's a reason, not an excuse, right? Why that sort of shit happened. But that's what I mean. Is everybody wanted to point to the Marvels as like because of the quote unquote quality of the movie or the concepts behind it and all this sort of stuff, like, that movie failed, right? And there has been a lot of people, specifically in the comic book realm, talking about cesspools of toxic bullshit, right? Like, fans in that realm talking about how, well, if you make a good comic book movie, people will go, and here's evidence of that. Pointing to things like Across the Spider-Verse and stuff like that, which is a definite.
That's such a.
It's fair to say that, but it's such a surface level view on things to say that quality alone will guarantee the success of a movie. We've known since the beginning of film that that's not true. Right? There are plenty of movies that we look back on and think, man, that movie's so good, it's a shame nobody saw it back then. Or there's been plenty of movies that we point to as like, man, these huge successes, looking back, that movie's utter shite, right? Like, we know that quality does not equal, like, cash, right? Yeah. And I think that Aquaman 2, as far as in the comic book fandom realm goes, Aquaman 2 coming out, and much like you're saying, being a really enjoyable time, and as I'm saying, just nobody went to go see it, right? I think that has really quelled a lot of the conversation about the like the quality of the Marvels, because like there was a long stretch there for a couple of months where it was kind of hard to talk about like comic book movies and the state of them and not hear people talk about how, well, it's just because Marvel put out a bunch of shit this year. And it's like, I don't know if that's necessarily true, guys. Like there's some actual good quality filmmaking going on in this stuff, but just unfocused and too much is like it's hard to like I didn't love Ant-Man Quantumania, right? We've talked a lot about that. I have definite parts of that movie that I could do without, right? But there's still some really good
There's
stuff.
There's some moments in that movie that make me cheer out loud. There are moments that right now I just want to go rabid and celebrate. Like you bring up Quantumania and I'm like, that was awesome. This part was great. And then it's like,
and people want to rip on stuff like some of the sillier, like quote unquote alien, like I know they're not aliens, but I don't know what other way to like refer to them, right?
I mean,
but these like quantum creatures, right? Like people point to a lot of that stuff and talk about it getting way too silly. And I'm like, I thought that was why we liked the Ant-Man movies. Did I forget that? Did we all just blank out that period where we kept talking about how the Ant-Man movies were sometimes the best movies because of the ways in which they took these comedic breaks in the middle of these like really heavy, like was that not how we all talked about Ant-Man 2? Like as the one that kind of gave us some breathing room from some of the heavier shit going on in the universe. Like why are we suddenly mad that Ant-Man is the sillier movie? Like I'm confused by that criticism.
Well, and
like,
by that criticism, by that very same criticism, that's one of the highlights and feathers in the cap of Guardians of the Galaxy. And Guardians 3 really cranks up the silliness of like the population of the galaxy to the next level. I mean, it
gets to be Star Wars level of just like, we just have a guy designed in the background that looks like a pig because that's just a funny way to make an alien. But then like people get so attached to that character, then suddenly we have special edition action figures of that very figure out there somewhere because that's who people lean into. Yeah.
I mean, every Animan on the High Evolutionaries planet is like, they're goofy. They're goofier than they look in the comics when it's basically humans that like have bird feathers on the side of their face.
Yeah, the hypocritical like criticism of like the comedy and the existence of the comedy in the Marvel stuff is always going to fascinate me, because I remember back when like Thor 1 and 2 were really kind of rubbing people the wrong way because they were too serious, right? And like the change to going into to 3, not Love and Thunder, Ragnarok. Like the idea of bringing on a more comedic director like Waititi and stuff like that was celebrated because of the ways in which Thor 2 specifically really kind of felt overly serious to people. And then like 5 years later, listening to people talk about how they really don't like the way Love and Thunder really was too silly for them. And I'm just like, I'm sorry. Were we not all bitching at to them to make them goofier to begin with? Like it's such a wild like pendulum swing. Like a lot of the weird stuff that you hear criticizing these movies, and I'll say the same thing for the WB movies. Like so many of these movies have tried to move away from the dark Snyderverse like style stuff, and people have talked about how it's hard for them to enjoy them now. It's just like, what the hell, man? Like, and this is not a matter of like poor movie companies can't seem to please any of these fans. It's just that like the fan base needs to really take a moment to reflect on the ways in which they contributed to a lot of this insanity as well. Even the idea of like the glut of films and people and TV shows and people saying like, oh man, they just overfed us. And it's like, well, yeah, no shit they did, because you guys kept buying tickets. Like you guys will sit back and talk about how you hate how many movies are coming out this year, but it hasn't stopped you from actually going to any of them. And don't let people online lie to you and say that they have. People will like wear it like a fucking feather in their cap that they didn't go and see Aquaman this year, and it's like, good for you. Like we're proud of you that you showed some self-restraint. Like, but if the only reason you did it is so that you could then complain about how there's too many of these movies out there, it doesn't work for me, right? Like it's such a weird. Like people need to acknowledge how we as fans, and I'm part of this, like the ways in which we really created this monster in a lot of ways.
Yeah, no, it's, I mean, and it goes back even further than that. Season 8 of The Simpsons, 300 years ago, when they're in the focus group and they're like, how do we make the show better? And the kids are like, we want really grounded stories, but then also robots and magic powers. Like, fans don't know what they want. And the fact that, like, in the social media age, it really feels like there are people in movie studios whose job it is to listen to the fans and try to modify in real time to chase the trends that they like in this moment.
That's not a conspiracy theory, right? Like that's obvious, right? Like that's I mean, and the thing is that social media is just the next evolution in in audience
that conversation, yeah.
Like research, right? I mean, like as a guy that is now currently in a field where part of my job is user research, like hopefully fingers crossed when I find one, but like that idea that like user research and testing audiences and all of that shit has always been in the water. So the idea that they would have access to something like Twitter and Facebook and all of this shit and not have somebody there that's monitoring that stuff to figure out what's working and what's not, no, of course they do. Of course they have a social media like arm that is responsible for putting stuff out, but also monitoring how things are being received and taking things in. Of course they have people that are doing all that shit. Like,
yeah, it's just, but it's still weirdly talked about in hushed tones. But no, it has to be happening. They'd be foolish not to. It's free market research. But as with anything, if you're not paying for it, well, you might not be happy with what you're getting.
also, you know, how's that old adage go? Like, if everything's free, then you're the product or some shit like that, right? Mm-hmm. Like, you know, yeah, there's just something to be said about the idea that like we just need to be more aware of that, and then there will be people that say, well, I'm very aware of that. Well, then like embody that shit, man. like own up to it. Like own up to the fact that like these things, you know. Really, at the end of the day, the most like distilled version of this that I can think of is the Disney remake conversations. And this will happen all the time on Reddit. And I will point directly to Reddit and Reddit threads because you can find 1,000 of them. But people will talk about like, you know, we'll pose the question of like, what's your least favorite, or what is your favorite Disney remake and why, or where do you think they really jumped the shark, blah blah blah. And it's always really interesting because people will up and down in those threads talk about how the Disney remakes are blatant cash grabs and there's no art to them, and they're just to continue IPs and all of these other arguments that are out there. But when it comes to naming specific films, the number of people that will be like, I hate them all except the Jungle Book was really good, or like, oh man, they're all such blatant crash grabs, except, you know, the last one, Little Mermaid, was at least had something to say or something to add to the story. Like every other person will then name the one that they're okay with, and it's always different across the board. And the same goes with Marvel movies. People will talk about how like this year really sucked, but man, they just wish that they could continue the Ant-Man stuff without Majors. Or like it's like, okay, so you did like what you saw in Ant-Man. It's not that that movie sucked, it's that there's this part of it that really kind of fucks the whole thing. Like the ways in which it's become this obvious thing to bash on the ways in which movies are made, but then nobody can seem to agree on exactly what movies actually exemplify that shit, just proves that there's a fan for everything. And so if you're not liking that thing, like, rather than talk about how the whole thing's a fucking wash, acknowledge that there are people out there that are putting money into this because they like it, and like maybe start and figure out what it is about this thing you didn't like so you know what to look for in future movies. Like constructive, like reflective criticism on like, man, this movie didn't work for me because I prefer it when this happens, like, which is the way that you and I try and talk about movies all the time. Yeah. Is like, I'm not down on this movie, but because I would rather see things in this direction, or this direction that they went in didn't work for me because I have these personal biases, you know, like whatever it is about you that isn't working along with that film. We just need more of that. You know, not that everything should get a pass in life, but like, there's not nearly enough self-reflective like work in any of this criticism going around right now, and it's not gonna. What that's leading to is those people that are. It doesn't get better
without that,
right? Because you talk about these people that are at these studios watching this stuff, and all they're seeing is people talking about how like they don't love this stuff, they don't love that stuff that the companies are doing. Nobody out there is saying what I would rather what didn't work for me because of my biases in this position. Like, I want to see movies that are more reflective in this way of me and my shit, which is the real answer. It's always the answer. We want movies to be more reflective of our views and our understanding of things. We don't want them to be so challenging all the time.
Yeah. All right. A couple of things on the things that you said. I think for a while, Hollywood felt like we can't let the fields go fallow. So a year like what we just got from Disney is the closest you get to the fields being allowed to fallow. Films that exist, there might be an audience, but if they don't go as well as we predicted or project, it's going to be okay because we have something in the works. Now, because of SAG-AFTRA and everything, we're actually going to see a year go fallow on the fields of Marvel. there's no new Marvel movie in 2024. And I think that's going to be really interesting once the crops start to come up to see if they are healthier and enjoyed by the masses. It's such an interesting time that we're in with that. Because the answer to fatigue is to give people a break.
Yeah, well, that's part of the reason why I'm a little nervous about what Sony's going to do. Because if Disney is trying to let this field go fallow in order to to replant the next year, but like Sony's out there just throwing salt everywhere.
I mean, but the Sony Spider-Man universe is separate from the MCU. But unfortunately, there are people who don't know that. There are people who don't know that. That's what I was just going to say.
It's not even people don't know that. Even people that do know that can't seem to just kind of separate them sometimes.
The two, yeah. The other thing is, Across the Spider-Verse as a comic adaptation, I disagree. I think it's a really good adaptation of the animated series from the 90s. And that is a very loaded statement that I just made. It's also another deep one that doesn't matter to people.
Yeah. Like, to them, Spider-Man is Spider-Man is Spider-Man, whether you're referencing the cartoon, the comics, or whatever. And like, superhero fatigue is really the bigger thing we should be talking about. Superhero fatigue is
the bigger thing. But then they say, like, it was a really good adaptation of the comics, and it's like, but was it? Like, think about the comics, and a lot of the stuff that is present in that movie was invented specifically for the animated series.
Well, I don't really necessarily hear about it being talked about as a good adaptation of any kind, but rather an enjoyable one. Yeah, that's the key. It's not whether or not it's more fun than a lot of what we're seeing in these other movies.
Right. Yeah, but I really feel like, especially with the fact that they're pulling in like Spectacular Spider-Man and animated versions of Spider-Man, like, and the fact that it's animated itself. As much as the comics exist, all of the like universe hopping and, the finale of the animated series with all the Spider-Men coming together, that is really where we first saw that stuff. So it's an adaptation more of a storyline from the cartoon than the comics. And I think that's an important distinction because of how nostalgia is, I guess, interpreted and imbibed upon, because I don't know, like the Ninja Turtles, nobody really remembers the 1984 comic books. They remember the 1987 TV series.
Spider-Man. Spider-Man has more tools in its arsenal than most Marvel heroes in terms of hooking people into coming back to see it. For sure. Yeah, because of all of the various TV shows, and let's be honest, like the movies, Spider-Man also has a successful series of films before this that really give a lot of people more handholds, for sure.
Yeah. And I think that's something that is undeniably a part of the success of something like Across the Spider-Verse in the year 2023. And the final one is about Josh Hutcherson, and it's about a Devon Decker complaint, and we're going to do an episode maybe that dives into this deeper, but that's not for a year from now. IFC. What does IFC stand for, Sejohn?
The Independent Film Channel, right?
Okay, so when I see that Kicking and Screaming is on IFC, which Kicking and Screaming do you think is going to be on IFC?
The Noah Baumbach one, right?
Yes, from 1995. That was an independent film. So I see that it's on, and I'm like, I'd like to tape that. And my father's like, why? And I'm like, I need to know if it's going to be Kicking and Screaming to Noah Baumbach one, or Kicking and Screaming to Will Ferrell one.
I'm sorry, you have the ability to record the TV, but you don't have the ability to search to see the info on it, to see like the cast and director and stuff. But
Sejohn, there have been times where like the info for movies that have similar titles is wrong. Okay. So I like.
So what did it say it was going to be?
So it said it was going to be the Will Ferrell one, right?
Oh, okay.
But specifically, the difference between those two movies is Noah Baumbach writes out the word and Kicking and Screaming with Will Ferrell is an ampersand. Like, that's the difference between them. If I'm writing about them, people should know this about me. If I'm talking about Kicking and Screaming and I write out the word and, I'm not talking about soccer, people. I'm talking about.
But this is an actual important thing in the terms of like how does IMDb credit them? Because that also is like how they go into like the copywriting like stuff and things like that. There's a reason why you don't see too many movies that are named exactly the same thing is because of this kind of shit, right? Of them wanting to protect their stuff.
Yeah.
So is that also how the company refers to it as well?
Yeah, those are from the company. That's not just from IMDb.
Okay,
that is the fact that when Kicking and Screaming came out,
well, I wanted to make sure it wasn't just from you, because you kept talking about that's the way you, but that's the way
I mean, if you're familiar with those two movies and the type of person who talks about those two movies, of which I am in that special crowd, that's the distinction. Like, it's one of those things where I've talked to people and they've said and I'm like, I just want to make sure, are we talking about soccer or the college movie? And a lot of the times they're talking about soccer, and I'm like, well, that makes sense. That's the film that people know. So I finally got a chance to look into it. And the only reason I bring this up, I wasn't going to bring it up until you brought up Josh Hutcherson, and Josh Hutcherson is in the soccer movie, which is what they played on the Independent Film Channel. That film is made by Mosaic. That is the production company behind it. It came out in 2005. Elf had already happened, and like Universal was on board for the release of Kicking and Screaming. It wasn't bought later.
The indie conversation.
Yeah,
I have to wonder if somebody fucked up.
That's all. That's where I'm at. Like, thank you for being the person to say it, because I see it and I'm like, oh, Kicking and Screaming, and it's with "and" instead of ampersand. But then the description
premiered at the Four Seasons.
Yeah, right. It is Four Seasons. Lawn care,
landscape. Yeah.
It's almost like somebody told some intern and get us the rights to Kicking and Screaming. You know, because Marriage Story, because Barbie, because all of these things that Noah Baumbach has done in the last 4 or 5 years that are relevant. So like, oh, wouldn't it be great if IFC showing one of his movies on it? And they're like, yeah, I'll get Kicking and Screaming. Now, because it's like an intern or somebody new at the company whose job it would be to do that, they probably only know the one movie.
Or, you know, a lot of the times the ways that these rights things work is they work as packages.
Yeah.
So it's something that you'll see a lot with like Netflix, where like for every big movie that they have licensed, there's also like 3 or 4 related films in some way, whether it's a producer thing or an actor thing or something, that also come along with it, because they do rights and packages. It doesn't make sense to do unless it's a big movie. It does, or a big series. It doesn't really make sense to do individual things for all sorts of reasons. So part of it is also like, was that just listed in a package that somebody just didn't, you know, they were like, what Noah Baumbach movies do we have? And they just kind of went through the list and they were like, oh yeah, and here's Kicking and Screaming, that's part of this package that we already own. Oh good, then let's just put that on. And then somebody goes back and goes like, oh, that was not the one that we thought we had.
Yeah, I mean, because Mosaic is an independent film company, so it tracks that they might have some of their earlier stuff before they became more mainstream and known.
Well, you know, movies take a long time to be made. Who knows when it was made? Even though
Right.
Elf had already come out, that doesn't mean anything about like getting Will Ferrell.
No, I
in
understand
that movie.
but I'm talking like the production company itself. They had movies early as in the 90s, CG.
Yeah.
So like it's when they hit and then they become big. It was just so interesting. So I'm like, I need to check. And I'm very happy that you're just like, I bet somebody fucked up. And I'm like, that's what my thought was too. Because I don't know if I would ever expect to see Kicking and Screaming, the soccer film with Will Ferrell on the Independent Film Channel.
Yeah, man. What I would like to see is the marketing for it. If because you know, IFC, at least out here, IFC, I don't know if like there's like cable packages where they don't have commercials, but they're pretty commercial heavy, right?
Yeah.
Like that's one of the ways
the caveats of the channel, unfortunately. Yeah.
Right, yeah. And when a lot of their commercial breaks, what they're advertising are other projects that are going to be coming up on IFC. They're very, you know, BBC does this a lot too, where they do a lot of inner marketing for other stuff that's going to be coming up. You know, there's some good, like, not to like praise like marketing techniques or anything like that, but there's some fun marketing shit that they do depending on what movies they have coming along, right? I would like to see the marketing that they would have done for Kicking and Screaming. If it's just some guy just being like this Friday, you know, 8:00, Kicking and Screaming, Will Ferrell, blah blah blah, or if they like lean into it, because that kind of would tell me that they fucked up, but they get that they fucked up, or they fucked up and like don't want to admit it. Like, I want to see how they push that movie on the Independent Film Channel.
Yeah, I don't know. I just was like, oh, that's interesting. This is a great chance for me to test the theory. And the theory was that it's the soccer movie with Josh Hutcherson and Will Ferrell as brothers. God, there's some funny stuff in that flick. I'm not a huge fan of it because I would rather talk about the Noah
Hutcherson
Baumbach
plays
movie.
his brother in that?
Yeah,
Wouldn't
Josh
he have been,
Hutcherson.
like 10 when that movie came out?
Yeah, so that's the whole thing, is that his father remarried.
Right.
No, he plays his uncle. It's like, yeah, he's the uncle of Will Ferrell's kid, and then he's like, God, you're a disgrace as a brother. And he's like, what? Like, that's the whole bit. Is Josh Hutcherson proving from the beginning that he was just a fantastic actor. Things like Little Manhattan and Kicking and Screaming, where he's basically playing an adult as a 10-year-old.
Right. Yeah, man.
Yeah.
Fuck that movie. Yeah.
Yeah, well, which one? Little Manhattan or Kicking and
No,
Screaming?
Kicking and Screaming. I like... It's one of those ones that when it came out, like, we watched it because it was just a Will Ferrell movie, you know what I mean?
That's
like,
why everybody saw it, yeah.
Yeah,
and honestly,
and like, so...
maybe it was independent, and then they're like, oh, now that Will Ferrell is Will Ferrell, we can release this movie. But then the problem is the Josh Hutcherson of it all. I'm like, he would have been a fetus if it were made really any earlier than Elf time. Like,
yeah. No, and Ferrell had other movies under his belt before Elf too, right? But they were just all SNL movies.
They were
like,
SNL
I'm thinking
stuff.
of like
Old
Superstar
School
and Night of the
came
Roxbury
out and things like that. So it's that. All right, we've gone for a really long time, and we still need to remind everybody what we're doing with the season 8 premiere of Desai Report. So that, I mean, it's a task if you want it to be a task. I mean, there's some reading associated with the next episode. And by reading, we mean watching. And by watching, it's been 2 years since the premiere of How I Met Your Father, the canceled Hulu reimagining, recontinuance, requel to How I Met Your Mother. And we talked about it when it first came out. And we were hoping to talk about it like, oh, we're 2 years in. Let's see how it goes. What are we expecting for the next season? But no, it got canceled. And we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about it. Me, Sejohn, Will's going to be here. And if, depending on when we record, because we have to coordinate with the Australian tides and make sure that he can get a signal out to us and everything, because apparently it's the 1500s. I'm an asshole.
Yeah, we just have to wait for the moon to be in the right phase, but we'll figure it out.
Yeah, exactly. It'll be a moonlit farewell, right? Ha ha ha. Everything's connected. I might also give my full opinion on Extended Family, because I've seen 3 episodes, and holy fuck, Sejohn and the listener, what this show, if this show gets a second season, then I just don't know anything about entertainment.
That's not the John Cryer one. That's Family Man,
That is the John
right?
Cryer one.
That is the John Cryer one.
That's Extended Family with John Cryer. There was a scene in the 3rd episode where I literally just could not contain my laughter. And I mean comedy in the show. This was very well written and performed, and everything about it worked. But everything leading up to that moment was just like, what is happening in this show? What is this show?
I'm excited. To talk about it.
So maybe that'll be part of it too. But the big crux of next week's episode, our 366th episode, our leap episode, is going to be a retrospective on the 30 episodes of How I Met Your Father. So that should be fun. And Will's here with a quiz.
Excellent.
Yeah. Anything else you'd like to say to the people, Sejohn?
No, we've gone too long. Let's close it up.
We have gone too long. The Discord is started. We'll have ways to get part of that, but we're actually working forward towards it. So be on the lookout for that. But until then, still the best way to get us just through Gmail, thesayreport@gmail.com. And make sure you specify in the subject line if it's just for Sejohn or myself, Devon Decker. But with that, no further ado, no more talking. Will, please take us home.
Thank you for listening to the Say Report with your host Devon Decker and Sejohn Serwick. Please follow the guys on Twitter and Facebook by searching for The Say Report, and you can always subscribe on your podcast channel so this is delivered straight to you and you can enjoy it every week. With apologies to your mother, we'll see you next time.